Welcome to your very first Astro video. In this series, I'll show you how to get started with the web framework Astro by building a custom blog from scratch. We'll cover everything from building simple UI components to advanced routing, pagination, generating an RSS feed, incorporating React, Tailwind, and a CMS, and more. In the end, we'll publish the finished code to Netlify, and I'll show you how to update your blog with continuous integration each time you post. All right, let's get started. If you've kept your ear to the ground at all this past year in the JavaScript space, you've likely heard a lot about Astro, and there's good reason. It's a modern take on building for the web that's ideal for building incredibly fast, content-focused sites. Now with Astro, you get the speed and simplicity of a basic static site generator with the power of JavaScript just when you need it. Over the years, front-end web development has moved more and more into using JavaScript for everything, including content. Now, that trajectory has resulted in lots of content-heavy sites relying on large client-side JavaScript bundles. And so we've got an impasse. As developers, we want to use JavaScript to template out our sites, but this often results in a slow experience for sites that could basically just be a quickly fetched HTML page. Now, here's where Astro shines. You can use nearly any front-end framework, React, Svelte, Vue, Lit, and more, because Astro is UI agnostic. You can use those to create content, but Astro ships no client-side JavaScript by default. That's right, no JavaScript. On build, it ships a static HTML page. If your components require interactivity, however, you can choose to intelligently hydrate those individual components. This is called island architecture, where the page itself is just a static HTML page with individual islands of interactivity where needed. What's more, you can choose when to hydrate components based on your needs with special directives. For example, you can choose to hydrate your page on load, or you can use client visible to delay loading your JavaScript bundle until it's visible on the screen. Everyone wins. You get the dev experience you prefer, and your blog visitors get to browse a crazy fast plain HTML site with little pockets of JavaScript where needed. Now in this series, we mostly won't be using external UI frameworks. Instead, we'll write Astro files for most of our routes and components. Now Astro files are basically just HTML with superpowers. Each Astro file is separated into two sections: the front matter, where you can write JavaScript, pass and receive props, and top-level await data to all be handled on build, and the body, which is plain HTML with the JSX-like syntax for templating out HTML. It's like JSX without all the annoying parts. The end result of working with Astro is that you feel like you're just writing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You don't feel like you're learning a framework or having to include a bunch of custom stuff. Use the platform, right? Let me mention two other things before I preview the finished site for you, and then we get the project up and running. First, while Astro is great for things like document or landing or blog or marketing or personal pages and other static content, it's also quickly moving beyond those use cases. They've recently released SSR support, and you can easily include state stores to create a more fully interactive site if you prefer. Now, we're not going to be doing that in this series, but I just wanted to point that out. Second, let me chat a bit about my assumptions about you going into this series and some other alternatives to starting with Astro. I'm assuming you know the basics of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. If you don't, no worries, but just know that I'll focus on Astro rather than explaining each HTML, CSS, or JavaScript concept. Now, you may be interested in Astro, but don't want to go through a full course. Well, I've just released an Astro in 20 minutes crash course on my channel where I cover all the basics working with Astro components, basic routing using React in Astro, styling with Tailwind, and more, and it's much faster paced than this course, and it would be a great place to start if you just want to figure out a little bit more about Astro before diving into an extended tutorial. Now, before I show you the custom site we're going to build, know that there are lots of starter templates out there that will get you a site or a blog without all the custom work we're going to be doing here. If that's your need, just go check out those themes on the Astro website. All right, let's look at the site we're going to build. Here it is, and I've actually got this up and running on my Coding in Public site so that you can navigate to it directly from there. See, it's got a nice little header area and then these blog posts on the home page. If you clicked any of these, obviously it would go to that blog post. We've also got a couple of other routes though, like we've got this about route that happens to be the same as what's on the home page, but just to show you different routing. We've also got a blog itself that has pagination built in by default and a list of categories with how many times each of those categories have been used. So you can just click forward to the next kind of sub route and then go backwards if you want to. Those all display dynamically. Now, each of these names also will give dynamic lists of posts by that person. Same thing when you come into here and you click on any of the categories, those also will list to posts about that reference doc. Now, there's also links inside of each of these blog posts. So this is a link back to any post with a reference doc category, and this is a link to a page with all of Darnell's posts. On top of that, when you scroll down here, you see that we've got this nice sidebar that will show any related posts. That is posts that share this exact same category, along with a list of all blog categories. And you can see how you could use this same idea to build out like an archive if you want to. We're not going to do that in this tutorial, but you'll have everything you need from working in this tutorial to do that yourself. Now, I've also created a lot of these tab animations just in the CSS. We're not going to be really writing much CSS throughout this project. In fact, I'll talk about the CSS in a moment, but you can see you get all this nice tabbing by default as you build out this site. Now, there are two other things I want to show you about the styling, and that is that number one, we have dark mode. All right, so by default, I've built this so it has dark mode, and you can see it picks up that color, but it kind of customizes it for the dark mode look, and all this looks great in dark mode. On top of that, we also have made this totally responsive. You can see here, even on a small screen size, everything looks great. You can click around and everything should work for you just like that. As you get larger, eventually the sidebar kind of snaps up here, right over here, and displays on the right. Now, I've showed you a lot of routes, but I've spent a lot of time talking about CSS. I will let you know we're not really going to write much CSS. I really want this to be focused on Astro. So I've created a global CSS file that you'll essentially import in one of the lessons, and then you won't really touch it again. Now, it is a little fragile because you actually have to follow exactly what I'm typing for it to use that style sheet appropriately, but that's so that we can focus on Astro. So I hope you'll forgive the fragility of that CSS file. The CSS for this site is really not meant to be a starter. I've optimized the styling for you learning Astro, not for your customization. Well, hopefully that gets you excited about what we're going to build, and you're going to have a site that looks exactly like this in the end. Now let's go ahead and get this set up. So let me switch over to my terminal, and you do need Node.js on your machine. If you're not sure if you have Node.js, you can just do node-version, and it should tell you that you've got something. I happen to have 19.1, but I didn't check the docs to see what you need for Astro, but any of the major versions from the last several years should work. Now, one of the great things about working with Astro is they've done a lot of work on their CLI tooling. Since I'm in the directory where I want to build this, I'm just going to type npm create, and then you'll see already I'm getting this autocomplete Astro at latest. If I hit enter, I get this nice animation, and then it asks me what I want my project to be called. I'm going to call mine Astro Blog Tutorial. Now in this case, we're going to start with a completely empty project so I can start from the beginning with you. So you can go ahead and just arrow down to that and hit enter. And then I'll press Y to let it install my npm dependencies. Next, it asks if I want to initialize a new Git repository, and I'll press Y. And then you can use TypeScript directly in Astro. I'm going to actually go down to relaxed. That way I really don't have to. I will show you a little bit as we get going though. And that's it. That's all there is to set it up. So let's cd into it, Astro Blog Tutorial right here. If you have VS Code and on Mac, you have to actually set it up this way. You can do code at dot and then it will open it up, or you can just go over to the folder and right click it and open it in VS Code. Okay, that's all there is to it. I actually have it up and running, and now we're ready to actually write some code in Astro. Now, one thing I want to point out is if you come into the package.json file, this is the version I'm using. So if you ever have a problem implementing something I've done in this tutorial, check first to make sure that whatever version you have hasn't changed the way Astro works. Astro's been pretty stable since the summer when it publicly launched, but you may find a thing or two that is updated versus what I show you in this tutorial. Now, if you're in VS Code, you're going to want to make sure that you've installed this Astro extension. This makes working with Astro a breeze. It makes it really fun. It highlights everything for you. And then on top of that, it gives you auto-completions, and it's just a really smart tooling. So it's this official plugin by Astro that you want to make sure you install. I'll be using it all throughout this tutorial series. Well, I hope you're as excited as I am. We're going to take our time in this series so that you'll be confident with Astro by the end. Now, if you get stuck at any point, let me point out a few helps. First of all, I've included a link to the GitHub repo in the description, and each lesson has a corresponding branch that holds all the finished code for the video. So if I come over here, you can see I've got all of these. I do have a couple other lessons past 16, but they don't really change the code. So that's the last one. This will be the finished code, lesson 16. But all you have to do if you want to jump in, for instance, if you have problems installing it, you can just jump in right here, go to lesson 1, grab the code right here, download the zip file, unzip it, and then open it up in VS Code. You can, of course, also just come into the folders themselves and then get what you need out of here. So sometimes I'll ask you to copy things from here, or sometimes you'll just want to see, hey, what am I missing? What did I type differently than he typed? Of course, if you get stuck, you can also comment on the video, and as I have time, I'll be happy to help wherever I can. A second help for you would be the astro.build website itself. Now, the docs are amongst the best I've ever seen for any project, and not only do they have it in English, but they're constantly translating them to all kinds of languages, so if English is not your preferred language, hopefully one of these will be better for you. Third, and the final thing, is to join the Discord community. The community really is amazing. Every time I ask a question in the Discord, super kind and super smart people are quick to help. Finally, I'll be slowly releasing this course over the next several weeks. Now, if you don't want to wait for that and you'd rather access like one single video that's the entire course all put together, I posted a link for that over on my Patreon channel for all my patrons. Or you can just wait and eventually all of them will be out on the YouTube channel. No pressure to support me for months on end, but if you sign up for a month at any amount, you can get the full access to the course right now. I want to say a huge thanks to the 3 who have been supporting me, as it's enabled me to spend more time developing this series. I can't wait to get started, so let's not wait. Astro, here we come. Hopefully you're set up and ready to go from the last lesson. If you had trouble at all, you can go to the link in the description and grab the code from lesson 1 and just get started with me there. And we're going to jump right into lesson 2. Now, I would open it up in VSCode or whatever your code editor of choice is, and then in your local terminal, go ahead and type npm run dev. That should spin up a dev server. You can see it's very basic. It just has the word Astro in it. So let's actually talk through how you work with pages in Astro. Now, there's really only one directory that's required. It's this src directory, because this is really where Astro does all of its magic. Inside here, you'll notice that there's one other directory, and that is a pages directory, and that's once again required. And then finally, you have an index.astro page. This is your home page, and it's also required to have anything up and running. So with these 3 things in place, you actually have your first route right here at index.astro. Now, each page in the pages directory is a route. So for instance, if I were to come in here and I were to just copy this and I were to paste it, I could just change this over to something like about. And now if I come over here, all I have to do is add about right here, and you'll see it actually changes pages. Now, it's hard to tell that, so let's actually change this to about and about like that. And now you can see if I were to go back, it goes back to Astro. So pages are automatically going to be routes, anything inside this directory. The pages directory can hold things like Markdown files or even MDX files, obviously Astro files as well, or it can hold HTML files if you want to write it like that. But Astro files are basically HTML files, so I'm not sure why you would want to do that. Maybe just if you were carrying stuff over from a previous project. If I come up here, you're going to notice, as we kind of get started here, that this looks very much like HTML. And that's because if you're using the Astro components, you're basically writing HTML. Now, because Astro's whole thing is no client-side JavaScript by default, even though you can template stuff out, you can see a little templated thing out here, it always generates plain HTML at the end of the day. Now, if you're observant here, you'll notice, and let me close the sidebar, that there's 2 sections. There's this front matter section, and then there's everything else. And while you don't have to use Astro components, you can use things like React or Vue or Lit or Svelte or a lot of those frameworks to actually generate your UI. The Astro components themselves are really powerful, and at the end of the day, they're basically HTML. You don't have to remember any weird things like class name or something like that. You just write HTML, and then you can template stuff out with the Astro syntax as you need to. So how do we use these 2 sections? Well, up top, you can actually write any JavaScript you want, including doing imports or top-level await. All of that is available up top. Down below then is where you template things out. So for instance, I can come up top here and I can just write JavaScript. So let's say something like, I've got a string here, we'll call it Bob. All right, and then maybe I have a number and I'll give it 1. And let's see what else we might have. Let's have an object, and inside here we'll have my name, and I'll actually just point this to string. Now let's point a number to my num, and then let's do one more. Let's do something like favorites. We'll make this an array where I have Astro and then like CSS and JavaScript. Okay, something like that. Now what I can do is actually use all this JavaScript up here to then template things out down below. Well, how do we template things out? We use bracketed syntax. So all I have to do is come inside here, and I could say something like, let's see, my string. And you'll notice that I'm actually getting this autocomplete from that VSCode extension I told you about in the first lesson. So if I save this here, you're going to notice Bob shows up right over here. I can change this over here then to like num, and that should show me my number 1. I can also come up top. What did I call that object? Oh, I just called the object like this. So it's an object itself, and then I can just reference any property on that, like name. And as soon as I do that, you see it points back to string, so there we go. I can also come in here and grab favorites, and then just grab, like, I don't know, the second thing in the array, and now I get CSS. So all this templating is possible because of this front matter up top here. So any JavaScript you write up here, including like functions or little helper things that will like transform dates or all that kind of stuff we're going to do throughout this entire series, you can then template out down below in this bracketed syntax. Now, in addition to writing JavaScript up top, you can actually also write JavaScript inside of these brackets. So I could come in here and say like to uppercase. You can see now CSS goes straight to uppercase. Now, sometimes you'll have things that you want to be optionally present. So for instance, let's come up top and say something like const is visible, and we'll set this to true. All right, now what I might want to do is make this entire thing visible or not visible depending on the state of this right here. Well, what I can do is wrap this whole thing in brackets like this, and I'll move this up. Let's come down this way, and all I have to do is come in here and say is visible. If that is true, and here I'm going to use a logical and, then I'm going to say go ahead and show that. Now, for some reason, if is visible is false, so if I come up here and change this to false, now you'll see that it disappears. Now, I can also say, hey, if it's true, show this. If it's false, show that. So let's come over here. Let's say if it's visible, then let's just make this normal ternary. And I'll say if it's visible, do that. If it's not visible, maybe let's show the very first thing, which would be Astro. So there I've got CSS. If I come up top here and I change this now to false, now I should get Astro capitalized. So all of that is happening based on this JavaScript I have up top. Now, of course, I can simplify this a little bit if I want to and just, let's see, I could come inside here and do my is visible here. And if it is, then I could grab the second thing. If it's not, then I could grab the first thing and we could get rid of all this. And now that same thing should work. If I come back up top here and hit true, then it should show CSS. So you can simplify it even a little bit more because in this case, they're both H1 tags. All right, so you can write JavaScript just like that down below as long as it's in brackets, and then you can reference anything up top here. Now note that anything in brackets or anything up top here will never be client-side. That's Astro's whole thing. You have to actually opt into client-side JavaScript, and I'll show you how to do that soon. Now, if thinking about this front matter as kind of like server-side stuff and down below as what's generated is confusing to you or the bracketed syntax is new to you, don't worry, we're going to be doing this all throughout the project, so you're going to get really used to it. Now, one thing we haven't talked yet about is how do you actually loop through data like these arrays right here. So we're going to come down here and inside bracketed syntax, what I want to do is reference, first of all, my object and then grab my favorites like that. And then I want to loop over these. Now, Astro uses a JSX style syntax. So what we can do is just loop over these things with a typical map in JavaScript. So I can take each one of these items and we can just call them items like these. And then I'm going to return here in parentheses, and that's important. If you do this in brackets, this is not a function. You're actually returning from here an object, and then Astro processes that. And maybe we actually make this a list item just like this, and I can just say inside here in brackets once again, item like this, and then close this out with li. Maybe then we should wrap all of this with a ul like that. And if I press save, you'll see I get all three things listed out here, Astro, CSS, and JavaScript. So all I'm doing is mapping through these using normal JavaScript, again, inside these brackets, looping through each item, and then returning something from the item. So you can see how quick and easy it is to loop over data very quickly using the Astro syntax. Now let me show you one other thing that we're not going to be actually doing a lot in this series because we're not going to be fetching stuff from outside, but you can actually use data from anywhere. So let me get rid of all of this here. What I'm going to do is actually request some stuff from a service called JSON placeholder. So what I'm going to do is do await right here, and you can do top level await in this top section because it's actually all wrapped in an async function kind of behind the scenes. So I'm going to now fetch like this, and I'm going to fetch an endpoint. Now if I come over here, I've got it pulled up right over here. You can see this is just kind of mock data right here. So let's go ahead and grab, and I'm going to actually use a different endpoint. I think I'm going to grab their posts endpoint, and then I'm going to limit it just to something like 5. All right, so we'll just grab the first 5 posts. When I do that and I save it, let's move back over this way. You see I'm getting yelled at because I left all this in here. So maybe let's leave that for now so I can use that. We'll say const data will be my await res.json. Now what I can do is use this data and loop through it down here below. So let's get rid of all this and just say data like this. And now I don't want to actually loop through the item because that's the object I'm getting back. Let's take the title of the post. And as soon as I do that, you see I'm actually getting back looped data here from a server directly in Astro. Now, when I build this, it will actually run this at build time, and at build time, it will take all this, insert it into here, and give me plain HTML at the end of the day. So everything up top here, once again, is only done on build. It's essentially like server-side script. Think about it like that. Down here below, this is what will get output as plain HTML at the end of the day. Well, I hope that's a helpful kind of tutorial of how to use data within Astro itself when you're using Astro components. And that's really what this series is going to focus on, using the built-in tools in Astro. At the end, I will go ahead and show you how you can set stuff up with React, but you'll have to stick around to the end of the series for that. Now, let me go ahead and strip all of this away so that we have a fresh, clean start, and I'll get rid of all this as well. And I want to point out just one more thing. If I open the sidebar over here, there is another folder here, and that is the public folder. Now, anything inside this public folder is essentially untouched by Astro. You can see here that it's basically at the root of the server, so all I have to do is reference it like this, and at the end of the build, it will assume that anything inside this public folder, would be basically at the base level of my site, the root level of my site. It's also true then that Astro touches nothing inside of here. But at the root level of my server, you can see here this favicon is showing up right up top here, and that's because it's referencing this in my public directory. This would be a place to put something like a robots.txt file or something like that. Everything would go inside this public directory. And this is actually where we're going to place our images as well as we move on through the series, and we'll reference them at the base level of the site. You should be well on your way, though, to understanding how Astro components work with data. Again, we've played with strings, with numbers, with arrays, with objects. We've grabbed data from the outside and then templated all that out in our HTML. At the end of the day, everything below these three brackets, everything below the front matter, will just be turned into plain HTML. And that's the beauty of Astro. All right, I'll catch you in the next lesson. Lesson 3 is all about layouts. Now, just to note that I have started my server with npm run dev down below, but I want you to look at the index.html page in the Astro page. You'll notice that there's a lot of reused code here. All this head items, and really the only thing that's different is what's inside the body. In one case we have about, in the other case we've got nothing. Now, I do have some unique things like this Astro title here, whereas this one says about. So how can we reuse this stuff without having to rewrite it multiple times? The answer is layouts. Now, layouts aren't anything special. They're just Astro components, but they're supposed to be used in this kind of a scenario. So what I'm going to do, and this is what Astro recommends, is I'm going to create another folder inside my src, and I'm going to call this layouts. And then inside here, I'm going to create a file. We're just going to call this main layout.astro. You can name it whatever you want, but that's what I'm going to name it. And then it's going to have the same kind of front matter. So I'll do 3 dashes and I can hit enter and it will actually autocomplete that because of the extension I have installed. And then all the rest of the stuff will be just down here below. So this will also give us a little introduction in how to basically use data between components and pass data around. We'll be doing that a lot in this series as well. But what I'm going to do is just copy all of this from either the about or the index, doesn't really matter, and I'm going to paste it over here. Now what I want to do is be able to use this layout and then just insert the individual things I need from each page inside here, inside this body. We can do this in a few different ways, but to start with, what I'm going to do is create what's called a slot. So I'll say slot like this, and you can do it one of two ways. You can either have it as a self-closing tag like this, and everything from another component will be put right in this slot, or you can actually have it like this and have a closing tag and have some like default text in here if you prefer. So let's just leave it just like that. And then what we're going to do is use this layout in the other components. So let's come back over here to the about component, and I'm going to actually strip out all of this. Now, how do I use the main layout? Well, it's like any other HTML tag. Like if I had an H1, I would just complete it like that. Well, because I'm using an Astro component, I'm going to type main like this. And you'll notice that the extension actually gives me an auto import here. I can come down to main layout with that little Astro icon, hit enter, and it will import that up top if I want to. I can also manually type this out if I want. It's just a relative path to that directory. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to label this just to kind of keep everything clean. So we'll say component imports. And then right inside here, because I've got a slot, all I have to do is like I would use an H1 tag or a paragraph tag or anything like that. I can just come in here and I can add whatever I want. So hi from about. All right, just like that. Now if I come over here and I go to the about page, you'll notice I get hi from about. Now if I remove this, what do you think is going to happen? Well, if you remember, we actually have some default content in that slot, and I'm going to get that default text. Now the extension also will go ahead and just add a closing tag since I don't actually have a slot in here. That's how it's going to use it. Now there's one other way you can use slots, and that is if I come back over this way, you can actually have named slots. So I could say slot and then give it a name like this, and then all I have to do is reference it. So like whatever, you call it whatever you want, and close it off. And then in the future, in the Astro component, I would just reference it like this with its name property here. So I could call it hi or whatever I called it over there. So that will actually drop it into that singular slot. We're not going to be doing that in this tutorial, but just so you know, that's what you can do. All right, now the other question we want to know is how do we actually dynamically change this right here, this about, to be based on whatever the page is? Well, we can do that with more bracketed syntax. Now, think about what we used before. Getting data down into these components means using stuff in the front matter, and the same is true here. So there's a couple things we can do. We can reference this with an Astro, capital Astro dot props dot, and then we could say something like title. Then, whenever we get a title passed in as a property, we get to actually reference it in this main layout. Let me show you what I mean. So if I come over here, I can just write this in directly here, title equals about, like this, in the about component, and you can see that this updates over here. If I say about 2, it should change to about 2. Now, that's actually not the recommended way to do it, because really what you want is all your stuff up top here, and what I'm doing is essentially just writing it directly inside here. So instead what I want is to call this title, and then up top to just destructure that. So I'm going to say const title, and then I'm going to grab that from my astro.props. That's especially helpful if you're writing that over and over again. You don't want to keep typing astro.props over and over again. Now my title is referenced down here, and I can reference it right down here. Now, while we won't be doing a lot of this in this tutorial, you can actually use TypeScript as well. Let me close this down and come up top here, and I could say something like interface, and I could call this whatever I want. We'll say props, we'll say title, and it needs to be a string. Then I just need to say this needs to be as props. The advantage of doing it like this is if I have another thing, let's say I said description, and I have this as a string, and then I pull this in down here, so description. If I save this and I come back over this way, you'll notice I'm getting a red squiggly line, and if I hover, it tells me that I basically need another property called description. It's missing. So I can come in here and say description, and even as I come in here and I start typing, you see it actually gives me that because I've created an interface for that. I'm not going to go a ton into TypeScript in this project tutorial, but just so you know, you can actually use it. So I could say description, my about page. Now I could also make these optional as well. So I could do that right over here, just like this, and then I can actually pass in defaults as well. This is not related to TypeScript now. This is just generally speaking with JavaScript. You can do this when you're passing things in. So I can say as a title, we could say like default title, and then over here for the description, I could say default description. What that means is if I come over here and I don't pass in any of this stuff right here, I'll actually get a default description and a default title. You can see my default title right there. Not a great default, but you can see how that's what it's going to do. Maybe let's change this to something else. We'll call this like my Astro Blog, and we'll provide another description. Now, one other thing, we're not actually using this description anywhere, so let's go ahead and do that quickly. So I could come down here and I can just add a meta tag with the name of description. And the content I could pass it would just be my description. All right, now that we've done that with the About page, I want you to go ahead and pause the video and try to do the same thing with the Index page. When you're done, play it again, and I'll show you what I did. All right, hopefully you had a great go of that. I'm going to go ahead and just copy everything from this About page and then open up my index.astro page and just replace all of that, because all I'm going to do now is change this to like my blog, and maybe I won't pass in a description over here. So let's get rid of this. And then lastly, I'll say hi from home. All right, that's really all there is to it because we're using that layout. Everything else just adapts for us. I get my blog up here, I get hi from home, and then my default description should go in. So that's all we're going to do when it comes to layouts. Now you can actually further abstract this if you want. For instance, let's go ahead and create one more component, and we're going to make this the whole head here. That way the head itself can be a separate component. It also gives me the chance to show you how to pass down props. So I'm going to go ahead and copy all of this and just delete it, and then let's open up the sidebar, and in the same layouts folder, I guess you could do this somewhere else, but I think I'm just going to do it here. I'm going to call this main head.astro, and I'm going to paste all that code back in here. Then what I want to do is I want to reference the title and the description from my props. So I'm going to say const title and description, and I'm going to pull this in from astro.props. All right, now with all that set and ready to go, I'm going to come back to my main layout. And once again, I'm going to start typing, and I'm going to pull in my main head. And you'll see once again that the extension pulls it in for me. I can either click it, hit enter, hit tab, either way. It should import it up top. Let's see right here. Yeah, there you go. Then let's go ahead and close out that tag. Well, how do I get my title and my description down to it? Well, it's the same way I pass in any props between components. I just type title equals title in this case, and then description equals description. Now I'll give you a little hint. You can actually remove the title equals title and the description equals description and just leave it like this, and it should work the exact same. I'm getting an error here because you can't use this normally unless you change your extension. Eventually this is coming to the Astro extension, but if I come over here, see, I can click on this right here, and this will allow me to enable a pre-release version, and then I think you have to reload. And let's save this, and you can see now I'm not getting those red squigglies. So I'm going to leave it like that for now. So this is eventually how you can do it, which is nice coming from a React background. I don't have to double type everything. All right, so there it is. And if I come over here, everything should still be working. If I jump over to my About page, everything is working over there. Now let me do just two things, and that is, first of all, let's go ahead and clean this up and add like a imported or component import, just so I keep everything straight. I'm going to get rid of this interface since we're not going to be using interfaces here in this project tutorial. And there we go. And then finally, what I want to do is go ahead and update my favicon. So if I come back over here in this favicon folder, I'm just going to replace it. And let's get out of here. I'm going to replace it with what I've got in the code in the description. So if you go to GitHub, go to lesson 3 branch, and then grab the favicon from there and replace it and save it. And when I do that and I refresh, you see now we've got the favicon that we're going to be using for this site. And again, it's pulling it from the public folder, and all that is coming in through my head component right here. All right, you should be set now with the basics of layouts, how to actually pass props between components, and then pass props down to other components. If any of that's confusing, don't worry, we're going to be doing that all throughout the site. You're going to be a pro in no time. All right, I'll catch you in the next lesson. All right, so I've got my index.astro page open, and I've got my server up and running over this way, and we're in lesson 4, which is all about styling. Now, we haven't really done anything with styling so far, which is why we've got this ugly beast over here. Now, there are a bunch of different ways you can use styling in Astro components, and they're super flexible. So however you like to write styling, you can do it in Astro. Now, that means I can come over here to start with, and I can just add a style tag. Because this is just plain HTML, I can say whatever. I can say like font size, like 4 rem. And if I save that, you see it gets a lot bigger. Now, in addition to that, because this is essentially like JSX style, I can actually write in here like JavaScript or CSS in JavaScript. So I could say something like background color, and then I could just say red like that, and you can see how I actually get the background color red here, and this is just using this JSX or CSS in JS style. Now, generally speaking, you shouldn't be writing a ton of inline styles, so I'm going to remove all of this and show you my preferred way, and that is to actually write style tags directly in the component. So if I come down here and just add style tags like this, the cool thing about these is by default, they're automatically scoped. That means I can just type paragraph like this and say like font size, like 4 rem, something like that. You can see it automatically gets huge. It gets to 4 rem. Now, the cool thing about this is if I were to come over here and inspect this, so if I jump in here and inspect this, you'll notice that Astro has added its own little like scoped styling to it. So in other words, it's actually scoping it, so not every paragraph tag is selected. Now, the other cool thing and smart thing that Astro does is it uses this new where syntax, which doesn't add any specificity by default, so you can see it just scopes it directly to this component. Now, for some reason, I want this entire style tag to be something that's more global. I can actually come over here and add an extra little attribute here, this directive called isGlobal. And you can see just like that, now it's global. If I refresh over here, you can see how now that's been stripped away from it. So this style tag will now affect every single thing on my site. I'm actually not going to be writing any global styles like this. I'll show you what we're going to do, which is going to be importing a style sheet later on. Now, one other thing I can do here is add a language like this and do Sass directly in here. That means I can do something like if I have a paragraph tag and maybe I come in here and I nest inside of here and have like a span, and then I say like color is blue, and maybe let's come over here and let's wrap this with a span tag like this, and I save it. It's going to tell me, first of all, that I need to install a dependency. So let's do that quickly, and then you can write these. I forgot to tell you that. We'll install Sass. Now, if I type npm run dev and get that back up and running, you'll notice over here that now this is blue, and I'm writing Sass directly in this style tag. Now, between this lesson and the next, I'm going to actually strip that Sass package out of here because we're not going to be using Sass in this project, just so you know what's going on. Now, you actually get another cool thing you can do in Astro, and that is you can pass in variables directly in here. And you can use the define keyword like this and type in vars. Now, this is especially helpful if you have like a bunch of dynamic variables that are going to be changing. So for instance, I could have like a foreground color, and maybe let's call it background color like this. So I'm defining these two inside the scope of this style tag. Then I could add in a paragraph tag here like background color, and I could pass it my var of background color. Now you can just use normal CSS variables as well, but the reason you would define it like this is so you can actually change stuff dynamically in your front matter, and that's what I'm about to show you here. So let's get rid of this, and we'll call this foreground color. Now what I can do is come up top here and type foreground color. So I could pass it something like HSL, and maybe we do like, I don't know, 20, which would be like a reddish color, 50%, and like 50%. And I'll copy this down, and I'll call this background color. And here, maybe I change this to something like 200. You can see how I'm passing in variables up top from JavaScript down to my style tag and then inserting them here. Now, where that would be helpful is if you're obviously dynamically changing these based on some user feedback or what page you happen to be on or that kind of thing. So we're actually not going to be doing this. We're just going to be using normal CSS variables that I've scoped in another file I'll show you in a second. But just so you know, you can do this if you'd like to. Now, a lot of times styling will obviously be done based on which classes you are passing in. So let's get rid of all this. And what we're going to do is have two paragraphs here, one here and one here. And this one we're going to give a class, and we'll say something like big, all right? And then if I come down here, I could just type big, and then say font size is 4 rep. So I've saved this here. You see one of these is big and the other one is small. Now there's nothing special here yet, but there is a way to actually dynamically decide which classes are attached based on a certain state. Let me show you what I mean. So if I come up top here, I could have something like is red, or yeah, that works. And then we'll say true to start with. Then what I can do is I can use a different thing other than a class. I can use what Astro calls a class list. This directive, because it's templated, remember, everything templated gets inside brackets like this. So it takes in an array. If I type an array here, I can type in strings. So for instance, I could type big. If I save it, nothing should change. However, I can also use other things. So I can pass in sets, I can pass in objects, I can pass whatever I want. But with a Boolean like this, what I could do is simply type a object here, and I could say red, and then basically just point it to the variable is red. And what this will do is say, if it is red, then I want you to pass it this red class. So let me save this. Let's come down here. We'll say red, and I'll say color is red. You can see there, now it's red. If I come here, we'll say it is now false. Now it should not be red. Now what is it doing? What it's doing is inside of this class list directive, it's evaluating this right here and saying, if this is true, then drop this in as a class. And just to show you what I mean there, if I come over here, you can see that now it just says red. Now both of them are scoped with this style tag, so they both have this Astro. If I come down here, you can see that right here. Where those are true, then do this. However, you'll notice that because this is just being evaluated, this is what's being spit out. So if I change this to false, nothing will be passed in. Now, of course, you can do like a template string if you'd like as well, but I like this syntax. I think it's a little bit cleaner. All right, well, that's about everything you might want to know when it comes to CSS in Astro. We're now going to mostly forget about CSS and focus on Astro itself, but I wanted to give you an idea of how you can style things locally inside of components. Now, generally speaking, you might also have some global style sheets that would affect everything, and that's what we're going to actually set up now. So let me get rid of all this. Let's get rid of all the style tag as well, and I'll get rid of this as well. Now what I'm going to do is open up the sidebar, and I'm going to create another folder inside SRC. Now again, it has to be inside SRC because that's where Astro does all of its work. We're simply going to call this styles. You can call it whatever you want, but that's what I'm going to call it. And then inside here, I'm going to create a new file. We'll call this global.css. Now, the content of all of this basically is going to fill out the whole site. And you can grab this from the GitHub and the repo. I'm going to put all this in. We've got 630 lines of code. Note here that this is not necessarily the best CSS. I wrote it to where if you follow this tutorial exactly, it will make your site look like how the tutorial sites look. And it basically will minimize how many classes we have to type and stuff like that. So I'm just trying to make it a little bit easier on you, but just so you know, you probably wouldn't want to just use this in your own site without some significant rewriting. All right, let's go ahead and save this. Now, how do I get this inside of this component to where it'll actually use it on my site? Well, let's think through the components we have. We've got a couple different routes. These are our pages, but there's one thing that's on every page, and that is this main layout. So what I can do is come into the main layout here, and because this is JavaScript up top, I can just import it directly inside here. So let's say something like style import, and all I'm going to do is say import as a relative path here. We're going to go up a level, then we're going to go to styles, then we're going to go to global.css, and I'll hit save, and that should pull in a bunch of stuff, and you can see it does. Now we also need to pull in a font, and so I've got a font we're using called Atkinson Hyperlegible, and you can get it from Google Fonts. I'll have a link to this in the description if I remember correctly. But we'll just grab all of these like this, and then I'll come up top, click this, and then let's copy this. And we need to add this in the head of our document. Now you remember that our main head is right here. I can either control click or command click, I think it is, or I can come over here and just add it directly in here, and that's what I'll do. So I'll come in here and just paste it in like that. If I move back this way, it should have updated that, and I think it did. Cool. Now I've got two other things I want to show you. First of all, Astro uses something called Vite as its bundler, and Vite has PostCSS built in by default. So what we're going to do is actually use a PostCSS plugin to get some extra benefits out of our styling. This will also give our global CSS file some superpowers. If I come over here, you're going to notice that I've got like nested things inside here, and I'm not using Sass. I'm actually using this PostCSS import we're going to use in a second. So you do need to do this to get the project working correctly, but I think it's also such a powerful tool to add things like auto prefixers and to minify your code automatically that really most people should be using PostCSS. If you want more of an insight into PostCSS, I've done a full tutorial on it, and I'll try to remember to link it in the description, but you can also just find it on my channel. So what we're going to do is go ahead and install this. So let me open up my terminal here, and I'm going to say npm I postcss and postcss preset env. Now this preset env is what allows us to write modern CSS and not have to worry about a bunch of backwards compatibility. Now that I've got postcss installed, all I have to do is come over here and add a new file. We're going to call this postcss.config.cjs, and that common JS is important because that's how Vite works. Now inside here, I'm going to export a module. So module.exports equals, and then this is an object here. We're going to pass it a plugin, and the plugin that we installed was called postcss preset env. So we'll require that. So require like this, postcss preset env. And then this itself can take in some arguments. What it can do is take in an object where you give it different stages. What we're going to do is say stage 0. So we get every possible thing from this postcss preset env to work, and that way we can use things like nesting and a bunch of other stuff. So if I come down this way, just real quick to let you know, this is what we're using here. We can use tomorrow's CSS today, and if I come over here, it'll walk you through how to do all this, show you how you can actually nest things using modern CSS. You can use other things like these color functions, and we're not going to do a ton of that, but you can see how now it gives us access to a bunch more, and I wrote the CSS in this project to require this. Now, one of the cool things that comes with PostCSS preset env is you get access to auto prefixer, which will automatically add things like WebKit prefixes to things. And in order for that to work properly, the best thing to do is to come into your package.json and add one more thing. And that would be something called a browser's list. We're just going to pass this the defaults, and that way it will use the defaults. Make sure you add a comma here so it'll keep working. And now, if we did everything correctly, I should be able to come over here and say npm run dev. It should get that dev server back up and running, but it's not. So let's see what's going on. Aha, I'm glad I did that. So what I need to do is just move this over here, I think. There we go. All right, that should work. Let me restart the server. And now I should be able to come over here and you see that this is all working as expected. All right, well, I hope you feel confident about how to write CSS when it comes to Astro. You can write it in the component. That's typically my default when it comes to individual components, is keep the styling directly with the component. You can also import things like I showed you with that imported global style sheet. Those imports will automatically be globally used throughout the site. In other words, they're not scoped to the component, and I went ahead and imported it into the main layout just to underscore that. And then finally, we set everything up with PostCSS, and that way we get all the modern features of CSS, while we can just write it however we want, and it will basically backfill to older browsers and make sure everything works. In the next lesson, we're going to talk about Astro components, including the footer, the nav bar, and a button component. I'll see you there. Welcome to Lesson 5, which is all about components in Astro. Now, we've already looked at kind of the basics of components in one of the very first videos, and we set up this nice layout component that has a slot where we can insert content from pages. In this case, what we're going to do is build 3 separate components, one of them fairly basic that won't take in any props, a second one that will pass in some props through a data file that we pass it, and then a third one that will be a link component with a bunch of different variations that will give us a chance to go over a lot of the things we learned with CSS and just how to work with components in a real life scenario. So let's start in that order. We'll start with the most basic one, and that is I want to put one right down here called a footer component. So I'm actually going to have you try to do this first and then pause the video. And then when you play it again, I'll show you what I did. What I want is for this to look like this. It has a footer right here, and that when it renders, it just renders a footer that says footer in it. That's all I want. And I'll give you a hint. We're going to actually build a new file over here, or a new folder called components. And inside here is where you're going to create a file called footer.astro. So all I want you to do is get that to show up in the main layout so it shows up on every page. All right, go ahead and I'll be right back with you. All right, well, hopefully you had a good go of that. What I'm going to do is just come in here and type a footer right here. And in the middle of this, I'm going to type footer. Now, I don't actually have to have the front matter up here since we're not using it, but obviously the front matter would be up here and then all the rendered HTML down below. So I'll save that. I'm going to jump back over this way. Now this should be here. I'm going to save it and it should yell at us because we did not import it. So I'm just going to drag this down and change this and this to footer. And then in this case, I actually need to go up a level and go into components and then into footer, and it's footer.astro. Okay, so that should show just like that, and hopefully that's what you got. All right, so that's the basic component. Now I actually do want to add one more thing in the footer component that gives us a chance to talk about one other thing, which is client-side JavaScript. Now, client-side JavaScript isn't really a dirty word in Astro, but it's not there unless you explicitly tell it to be there. So what we're going to do is create a little section down here that reads out the copyright, including the current year. And it's always best to do that kind of thing on the client so that it's evergreen and you don't have to remember to like manually go back and update your site. Now what I'm going to do is just add a small tag, which will make the text small. And then I'm going to add inside of here copyright, and then I'll include the HTML symbol for the copyright symbol. And then I want to span with an ID of copyright. This is where we'll insert the year with vanilla JavaScript in just a second. Next, I'll type a pipe character and then do all rights reserved. All right, so there it is, pretty basic. And if I save it, you can see it shows up over there on the right. Now we just need to add the year to it. Well, how do you add client-side JavaScript? You might think, well, we can write JavaScript, we'll just write it right up here. The problem with that is that it's actually only going to work when you build. It's not going to be on the client because remember, all of this is just for the build. Well, you might say, well, I have to template stuff out. Maybe I actually add it in some kind of bracketed syntax. But again, that's only for the build. So how do we get it on the client? Well, if you want something on the client, you just include a script tag just like this. I'm going to go ahead and save that, and then let's close the sidebar. Inside here is where you can write vanilla JavaScript, and then it will actually bundle all this together on build and make it available as a module. So let's just do this. Let's do document.query selector, and all I want to do is select anything with the ID of copyright, which should only be this. Then I'm going to update the text content. This is now going to be equal to a new date. So based on whenever they come, it will look at their browser, look at their time, grab a new date. Then what I want to do is set this to get full year. And then finally, I want to say to string. That way I make sure that it's a string being inserted here as text content. Now, when I save this, it should actually update and give me 2022 over here. So client-side JavaScript is possible in Astro. You just have to explicitly tell it, I want you to put it on the client. And that's what we've done here. So that's the first component we've created. The second one is going to be a nav component. So let me shut this down, and then we're going to open up the sidebar. And under components, I'm going to add another file, and this is going to be called nav.astro. In this case, we're actually going to pull in data in the head matter, so I'll leave it there. But everything else will be inside of this nav element. Now this gives me a chance to reiterate something I said in the last video, and that is that I've really tried hard to make it to where you don't have to type a bunch of classes. You can just focus on writing Astro and not have to worry about the CSS. The downside to that is you've got to basically type stuff exactly as I do, or things may not work properly. So for instance, you do need an ARIA label here because we're going to have another navigation item later. So an ARIA label like that, and it needs to say primary just like that. If you do something else, it won't style it correctly. Now everything inside of this is going to be inside of a class called navbar. And again, you need to have that to make sure everything is styled correctly. The long and short of this is I don't want you to have to constantly be typing out CSS when you're trying to learn Astro. So I've tried to do that work for you, but it's a little janky as far as CSS goes itself. Now inside here, we're going to have two things. We're going to first have an anchor link, and this is going to point back to the home page. And you do need to have an ARIA label on this as well, because it's just going to be an icon. So you need to actually tell it what it does. So here we're going to say go home. And then we're also going to give this thing a class. So we'll say class of logo mark. Now in a second, we're going to add an icon into here. But the other thing we're going to need is a UL. This is where the actual nav items will be displayed inside of LI tags. Now this component gives me a chance to talk about two separate things. First, I want to show you how to work with libraries in Astro. And secondly, I want to show you how to loop through data. So let's start with the libraries. If you come over to the integrations, there are some really cool integrations. One of them built by one of the makers of Astro is called Astro Icon, and it's really cool. What I'm going to do is just open up the terminal, close that down, and type npm I Astro Icon. All right, once that installs, I'm going to do npm run dev and get this back up and running. And then as you come down here, you're going to notice that we get access to several things. First of all, you've got a bunch of official icon sets here that you can pull in, so you don't have to have them anywhere in your directory, and it will just create these SVG icons for you. The other thing you can do is have local icons, and they recommend you put it in an icons folder. In fact, I think you need to. So you put it inside of an icons folder, and then any SVG icons will then be minified and placed directly inside of your HTML. Now, the benefit of embedding SVGs is that you don't have to go do a fetch for a little tiny SVG. So let's go ahead and do this. Let's open up the sidebar. Inside this SRC folder, I'm going to add in here a folder called icons. Next, we're going to open up this public directory and just copy over this icons. And I just held down the Option key on my Mac to do that. And I'm going to go ahead and rename this. Let's call it something like logo mark.svg. And what we'll do then is transform that dynamically right here. Either this way, or if you're pulling from one of these packs, either way you can use this same import. Then like you see here, all I have to do is pass it the name. So let's come in here and I'm going to say icon like this, name equals, and it equals logo mark. Now you don't have to do logo mark SVG, just leave it just like that. And then you can pass in other attributes as you need to. So for instance, I'm going to pass in width of 60. Now when I save this, if I jump back over this way, you'll see nothing's in yet because we haven't actually added it, but let's go ahead and pull this in our main layout. So right inside here, this main layout, I'm going to pull in my nav. If I start typing, again, that extension is going to let me auto import. So I'll do that. And I just want to make sure that this goes with the rest of my custom imports. So I pull that in and there it is right there, the custom icon. Now I can go ahead and inspect this and you'll see if I pull this down that it's actually inserted the icon directly in here and it's actually passed along that width attribute to it, which is really cool. So that's how we're going to use this icon library to minify our SVGs. Now I also mentioned that inside of this UL is where all of our nav items are going to be displayed. Now we're going to do that by looping through some data we pass in. I'm going to pass that in through a folder here called data. Inside here I'm going to have a file called navdata.js. And I'm just going to paste in a very basic array. We could obviously just include this in the nav component itself, but I just want to show you how you can import data in Astro. So here it is, it's just JavaScript and it's a default export. So I'll go ahead and save that and then jump over this way. And up top here, what I want to do is come in here and do like data imports. Maybe up top here, we say something like, let's call it library imports. So let's go ahead and import. And I'm going to call it the same thing, even though I could call it whatever I want since it's a default export. Let's call it nav data. And I want to import that from as a relative path here. I want to go into my data and then my nav data. Now that I have access to this as nav data, I can loop through this using our bracketed syntax. So I'll simply say nav data.map, and I've got an item, and all I want to do is output here a link. And for my href, I want to point this to item dot, and I've got name or path that are already showing me from that import. That's really nice. And then I can come over here and say item.name. So if I save this, they should pull in, and there they do right there. Now, if yours doesn't look just like that, it may be because you didn't change around something I messed up in the last video. I added a note about it, but you want to make sure that this says plugins like that, and then you might need to restart your server. So not plugin, but plugins. And if you restart your server, it should look something very much like that, where there's a little bit more space between them. All right, now that's fine and good, but we've got one more component we need to add. So we'll create that last component, which is going to be a link component that we can use all throughout the site that will be really customizable based on what we need. Then I want to add a little bit of vanilla JavaScript to the bottom of this nav component, and I'll show you a different way you can actually include JavaScript in a component. All right, so let's start with creating a link component. So I'm going to come over here and type link.astro. Now, once again, we've got front matter, and that's where we'll start. Now, I mentioned earlier that you can use TypeScript directly in Astro. Now, we're not going to do that mostly throughout this project, but I do want to do it just in this component to show you the use of it, since we didn't really get to explore that last time. So if I say interface and props, let's just list off the things we might want. Well, we know we need text, so let's add text as a string. I also need an href since this is a link, so that will also be a string. And then we're going to add 5 other options. So first of all, I want a style, and you need to actually select a style. So we're going to leave it as a required statement, primary and secondary. Next, I want you to be able to include an icon if you'd like to. And there's a few things I want to be true about it. So that little question mark means that this is optional. And we're going to pass in an object here with 2 different properties. A name, which will be required if you pass an icon in, and a side, which will also be required. Sides you can choose between are left and right. In other words, you can have it showing on either side depending on what you pass in. 3 more now. I want you to be able to decide whether or not it's going to be filled. And let's pass this in as a Boolean. And then I'll copy this down. This will be border visible. So I want you to be able to say, hey, I want to see the border or I don't want to see the border. And then finally, I want to be able to pass in some extra classes if I want to. And again, this will be optional just like the other 4 up above it, and it will be a string. Now, we haven't yet taken any of these things into the component, so let's grab all of these and let's destructure these from astro.props. So const equals, and then we're going to say astro.props as props. And we're saying as props because it's pointing to this interface right here. So what do we want in here? Well, it's the exact same things we defined up top, except I obviously don't need to pass in like string and all this kind of stuff. So let me clean all this up, put commas after it, and I'll be right back with you. Before we actually write it, there are 3 more things I want to do. The first is I want to pass in defaults here. So I want it to be true by default as far as whether or not it's filled, and I want this to be false by default. The final thing I want to do is pass in a rest prop like this. In other words, anything else I pass to it, I want to be able to just drop into the tag of the anchor link, and I can do that with this spread operator and pass in a rest. Like I mentioned, this component is a little bit more complex, but I want to show you what you can do with Astro, and also this will give us a chance to review several of the things we talked about with CSS. Next, let's come down here and let's actually just add this as an anchor link. So this is what's going to be returned from this component. Now this should be pretty plain. What I need here is my href passed along. I know inside here I need an icon and I also need the text. So we'll come back to those. For now, let's go ahead and fill out the rest of this opening tag. And what I want is my href. Next, I want my classes. Now, I could just type class like this, but the right way I wrote my CSS, I actually want to pass this a class list. And then inside bracketed syntax here, I want to pass in an array. Now again, this class:list directive allows you to pass in strings or sets or arrays or objects so that you can basically customize the experience based on what you need. And you can have a lot more dynamic values without a bunch of extra syntax. So let's pass in a few things. First of all, I know each one of these is going to need a class of link. So if I add it just like that as a string, it will be added directly to the anchor link. Next, any classes that are passed in, I want to spread in here. And since this is just going to be a string, it will just be a string of classes, and I can add them in directly like that. If they're not there, then nothing will be added there. Next, I forced people to write a style. So they have to choose either primary or secondary, and that will be used to style the color of the button. So I'm going to again pass that one in. And then finally, I'm going to pass in an object here with 2 different properties. One will be called filled, and that will only show as the string filled if isFilled is true, which by default it is. And then finally, I'm going to pass in another class of bordered, which will only show if border visible is true, which by default it's not. So that's all the classes, and you can see how I've got just plain old props being passed in here. I've also got a string, I've also got objects, and all of this is possible in this class list directive. Now I know why I called this classes, because class is a reserved word in JavaScript, and all this up here is JavaScript. You can't use class, if I remember correctly, so that's why I have to type it as classes. Now inside this anchor link opening tag, I want to do one more thing, and that is I want to spread in the rest operator. In other words, anything else I pass in here, like a data attribute, will just be added directly to the front of this anchor link. All right, that leaves only the icon left, so let's do this. I want to have a couple different options. So I want an icon here as an option if it's on the left. I want an icon down here as an option if it's on the right. And then in the middle, I'm going to have a span tag. And in the middle of this, I'll just have the text of the button itself, the text of the link. Now, when it comes to showing these icons, I first want to check that they have passed in an icon, because you don't have to. And then if they have, I'll use a logical and. I want to figure out the icon.side. If it equals left, like this, then once again, with a double ampersand, I want to return an icon. So icon just like this, and I want the name to be equal to the icon.name. I want the height to be 24, and I want the width to also be 24, and those will just be passed along. Now there's a couple things we need to do, and then I'll talk you back through that. So if I come back over here, the first thing I need to do is copy in this, because I need the same thing in this file since it's using that import. All right, so now that should work right here, and then let me talk you through this. So what I'm doing is I'm checking that they've actually passed in an icon. If they've passed in an icon, it's going to have 2 properties, name and side. I'm checking the side, and if it's on the left, then what I want to do is grab the name and drop it in this name slot. And then once again, I'm passing in the height and the width as different attributes to the actual icon component. Now what I can do is just copy all of this and add it in directly down here, and I can change this to right. And if it's supposed to be on the right, now it will show up on the right. Now, it can't be both of these at the same time, so that means one of these will never show, and the other one might show if they passed in an icon. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and save that, but we have yet to actually use this anywhere. So let's come back over here, and let's convert this anchor link to our new special link that we just created. So I'm going to get rid of all that, come in here, and I'm going to start typing link like that, and it should auto-import that component. And here it is right here, so let's bring it up here maybe, and I'll add like component imports. Now I'm going to go ahead and close out this tag, and you'll see I'm getting a red underline, and that's because the kind of relaxed TypeScript option that I chose when we first set up the project will tell me, hey, there's some required things you need to put in here. And if I hit Control and Spacebar, it will show me what those are. So you can see that these ones without the question mark are required. So I need to have a text, a style, and an href. So let's start with the text. And just like I have with my plain old anchor link, I want this to point to item.name. Let's go next to the href. This should be item.path. And then for my style, you can see IntelliSense there saying it has to be primary or secondary. So let's start with primary. And as soon as I save that, you see it actually shows just like this. Now you can see if I change this over to secondary and I save it, now it takes on that purple color. Now I had a couple other options here. I could have is filled. By default, that's set to true, but I can set it to false. Now you might think you can set it to false like this, but that's a string of false. I actually have to pass in bracketed here, false, just like that. And now it's not filled, and that's actually what I want it to look like. If I wanted there to be a string around it though, I could say border visible, and I could say true, and now it would have a ring around it, and I don't actually want that in this case, so I'm going to get rid of that. Now you can also pass in things through that rest spread operator that we passed. So for instance, if I said something like data-nav link, like this, then that would actually be passed on. And just to show you that, I'll go ahead and open this up. And you can see how that data attribute was passed on directly to those links. Now we also talked about the icon, but I've yet to show you actually the icons where you can find them. So if you come back over here, you'll notice that in addition to local icons, like I said earlier, you can actually use these icon packs powered by Iconify. So I've just opened it up over here, and you can look at pretty much anything you want. So let's just grab something from Google Icons, and we'll grab this, sure. Just copy it right here, and if I were to come in here and pass an icon like that, it takes in two things that have to be an object. Now, this bracketed syntax lets me pass things in, but it's not itself an object, so I have to actually add the object here, and now I have two options. I have name, this needs to be a string, and it's what I just copied, and then I need a side, and this can be either left or right. So let's go left to start with. So let me save that and jump back over this way. And there you go. I get this icon here. And again, it's just embedded that directly in the page. That's pretty cool. Now I can come back over here and do right. I could come back up here and say primary and then remove this so that the default filled shows. Change this back to secondary. And now I get that purple color. All this is possible because of the way that we set up that Astro component. Now I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this icon for now because that's actually exactly what we want it to look like. And I've actually added special styling just to this with the data link so that way it stays as this black color no matter what, even if you change this over to secondary. So I promised one more thing, and that is to add some more client-side JavaScript. What we want is for it to determine if any of these nav links are the current page. Now once again, to include client-side JavaScript, you have to add a script tag. In this case though, I'm not going to actually write it directly in here. Just to show you that you can do this, you can actually import JavaScript instead. So what I want to do is come up, we're going to go into a JS folder, and then we'll look at nav.js. Now this doesn't exist yet, so let's go ahead and create that. So over here, I'll say JS, and then inside here, I'm going to write a nav.js file. If I come back over here and I save it, let's just go ahead and add something like console.log in the nav. All right, and then let's open it up over this way in the nav. All right, so it's working. Perfect. Now, what do I want to do? Well, I want to grab all the nav links, and since we added that data attribute, let's use that data attribute to grab these in JavaScript. So I'll say const nav links, document.query selector all, and I just want to select anything that is data-nav link. Then let's loop through each of those, so nav links, and then I'll do a .for each method, and I'm just going to grab each link, and I'll ask a simple question. If the link.get attribute, and the attribute I want is href, if that equals the window.location.pathname, then I want to say link.set attribute. The attribute I want to set is aria current, and I want to set that to page. Now, if I did that correctly, it should actually add ARIA current to either of these pages if I'm on that page. Now, I'm not on any of those pages, so let's go over to this About page, and now you can see that that's exactly what it's done. If I come up here and I look at here, it says ARIA current equals page. Now, it's done that because that's the route that I'm at, and it's checked it as soon as the nav was on the page. So that's another way you can use JavaScript in these components if you want it to be client-side. Well, we've now learned some more about Astro components, including how to create these really complex ones that let you do lots of customization, how to loop through data once again, how to import data, how to use libraries, how to write client-side JavaScript. All that's been in this video. Now in the next video, we're going to actually start building out the blog page itself, and we're going to add some Markdown files to actually start creating our blog. So we'll work on routing in the next video, and I'll catch you there. Welcome to Lesson 6. If you've been following along, you've already got your own code. If you want to jump right in, you can just go to the link in the description, grab all the code from Lesson 5, open it up, install the npm packages, and then just get the server up and running like I've done here with npm run dev. That's what I've got right over here, and you can see we're on the About page, and this little link we set up last time is working. I can go back to the home page, and now I'm at the home page. Now what we don't yet have is a blog page. So we're going to work this time on kind of the basics of routing. Now we've already added one route, and that's our About route right here. And all the routes, as a reminder, are anything that's in the pages directory. Now you can actually have nested routes as well, and that's what we're going to have. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up right over here, and we're going to add a new folder. And I'll just call this blog. Inside the blog, I'm going to start with an index.astro page. Now it's an index page, so it's kind of the root level of that blog directory. So I'm going to actually copy over everything from right here, and we're going to paste it in directly here. Now, because I'm down one more level, I actually need to go up one more level like this, and this should all work. And now I can just say over here something like blog. Again, Astro is going to create this route for me directly. So if I come over here, now I'm in the blog, and it says blog, now I'm at About, now I'm at the home. So that's all there is to kind of the very bare bone basics of routing. What I want to do is think about a couple other use cases. One, what if we come over here, we start typing, and we go to a file that doesn't exist? Well, we're going to get this default 404 page not found. I wouldn't mind something a little bit more custom than that, so we're going to create our own 404 page here in a second. But I also want to go ahead and fill out this About page, which will give me a chance to talk through images, which we'll use in a second in the blogs. So the first thing I'm going to do is add an images folder in our public directory. Now remember, public is kind of at the base level of the server. And what I'm going to have you do is grab all the images from the GitHub repo link for Lesson 6 down below and add them directly in this. I'm going to do the same thing and be right back with you. All right, hopefully you grabbed all those. There's 6 post images, an image default, and a headshot. Now for now, we're just going to use the headshot, so I'm going to go ahead and close that up. We'll use all the rest of those in a little bit. Next, I'm going to open up my About page, and then let me close down the sidebar, and we're going to actually customize this About page to look a little bit different. So to start with, I'm going to just have a section tag in here. This section is going to have 2 classes. I'm going to have a container class and an About class. And then finally, so that people know what this section is about, I'm going to add an ARIA label here that says something like About Me. This section itself is going to have 2 things. It's going to have an image, first of all, and I'm going to point this simply to /images/headshot.jpg. Now that's at the root level, so it should pull from that public folder. For the alt, I'm just going to say like my headshot. And then I'm going to go ahead and give it a width of something like 200 and a height of maybe 330. So if I save that, that should show up, and there it is. I've got some styling in our global CSS file so that that's how it's supposed to show up, right like that. And then as a sibling to this image, we're going to have a div with the class of content. This is going to have an h1 with a class of h1. Now I separate out my classes from my semantic tags, so that way I can have like a h2 tag that happens to be styled like an h3 or whatever, and that's typically how I like to do it. We're going to just call this something like my blog. Next, I'm going to have a paragraph tag, and inside of it, I'm using Emmet here as an abbreviation thing, and this comes default with VS Code. You can get it in pretty much any code editor. I'm just going to type like lorem, 40, something like that. And that drops in a bunch of lorem ipsum. Now finally, let's use that link component we created last time. So I'm going to start typing link, hit enter, and then close this out, and it should have added it in up here, and it did. And what I'm going to do is just remember what I need. So if I hit Control and spacebar, since we typed it, I now know I need to type in href. In this case, what I want is this to be a link to email me. So I'll say mail to, and I'll say chris@codinginpublic.dev. For the style, I want this to be primary. For the text, I want this to say contact me. I'll go ahead and save that, and that should all pop in like this, and it's that black color because I set it to primary. Now, one other thing to think about when it comes to just general accessibility and the way your page should be laid out, we don't really have a main content tag yet. So if I were to add that, where would you add it? I'm going to add it in my main layout because that's where all the pages are kind of slotted in. If I grab all that text and hit Command-Shift-P, I can type wrap with abbreviation and then simply type here main and hit enter. And just like that, all my main content on my pages will have this main tag wrapped around it. All right, now that we've got this about page, next let's set up our 404 page. So I'm going to go ahead and copy all of this, open up the sidebar, and if you just add a file in here called 404.astro in the main pages directory, so in other words, at the same level as like your index and any other top level routes, then you can do the same basic thing. So I'm going to paste this in here. Then Astro treats that as your 404 page. Now, if I come over here and I add something crazy on the end of this that doesn't exist, it's going to bring me to this page, which happens to look the same as my about page right now. So that was not a very helpful example. Now we're going to change this up just a little bit. So this will say like page not found. And we can just remove this description and use our default, which I think is something like my blog thoughts or something like that. Next, I'm going to go ahead and strip out this entire section here. And this time we'll just have a div with the class of container. And as a refresher, you can actually add styles directly inside of here with like inline styling. You can do this a couple ways. You could just add it as a string like you would in HTML because, again, Astro components are basically just HTML with superpowers. Or I can use more of like a CSS and JS style. So that's what I'll do here, just to remind you that you can do that. So I could say like display grid. I could say place items, center, text align, center. And then finally, we're going to use one of the custom variables I have set up. So I'll save that, and that should be a blank page for now. But inside this div, I want to add a couple things. I want to add another enclosed div here with an h1 with a class of h1. This will say, welp, this is awkward. All right, this is awkward, like that. And then below, I'll have a paragraph that says, we seem to have misplaced something. Now finally, as a sibling to that div, let's go ahead and add back in a link tag. In this case, I want to point it back to my homepage. So my href will be my homepage. My style is going to be secondary. My text is going to say go home. And then finally, let's go ahead and add one of those icons. So again, I need to pass in an object. The name of the icon is going to be tabular home. And that I'm just getting from the icons repository that I showed you in the last video. And then as far as the side, let's have it be on the right. Now here's the magic of setting up those components very quickly. If I hit save, here's what we get. Isn't that cool? Now I'm noticing that it's kind of smashed, and I think that's because while trying to type out this custom thing, one of the reasons I didn't have you do that, I mistyped it. So this should be space, small, and now you see that that's what I have. Small, small didn't make much sense anyhow. All right, so there we go. We've created two different routes. The about route we've basically made look how it's supposed to look, and then the 404 page now looks how it's supposed to look. So any page they go to will have something, even if it just says go back home. Now we do have a blog route, but there's nothing much there. So that's what we're going to focus in on now. What I want to do is inside this nested blog route, I want to start adding some files. Now once again, I want you to go to the repository, go to lesson 6, and just grab all the Markdown files inside of this blog and add them directly in here. I'm going to do that, and I'll be right back with you. All right, so here we are. We've got the 6 files, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These are all just posts, and you'll notice that they're just Markdown. Now, you can just use Markdown, or you can also use MDX, which essentially will let you write JavaScript inside Markdown files. I won't be going over that in this series just because we're going to try to keep it as basic as possible. It's basically the same thing, except you can write JavaScript inside of these. You can see here I've got this MDX only features section open in the docs, and basically you can actually use like variables up top and use them down below. You can also actually import components, including Astro components, and use them directly in Markdown files. Other than that, though, it's pretty basic. All you have to do is install it, and you can do that if you use this MDX integration. Astro add MDX will do it for you and install everything for you. So I'll just let you know that that exists, but we're going to be using Markdown files. Now inside here, you've got front matter, which is similar as the Astro files, and that's because that's how Markdown works. You have a front matter section, and then you have all your content. Now in this case, I've just got a bunch of random lorem ipsum, but let me talk you through some of the other properties we have in here. I've got a title, and you can see that this is just a string. I've got some long like this one or some very short. I've got a date. I've got an author. I've got an image that's going to point to one of the images that you imported earlier. It has an alt and an src. a description of what this is about, this would be for SEO and other things, whether or not it's draft, and then I've got a category connected to it. So all these are the same, they just happen to have different things, and that way you've got kind of real blog posts to play with. All right, so the last thing I'm going to do is just add some very basic links just so we can see how that works. So let's have a UL here, maybe inside here I'll have LI, and this will be a link, and I'm going to point to as a relative path here, post 1, like this, and we'll just say post 1. Now why don't I just grab all of this right here, I'm going to hold Option and Shift in the down arrow, and let's copy down a few more, and then I'm going to grab, actually let's see, let me grab all of this right here. I'll hit Command Shift L, that will get me access to all of those, backspace, and then I've got an extension called Text Pastry, 1 to X. We'll just type those out 1 to 6. You can also do this if you want to. You can just expand it in Emmet this way. I'll just move over this way and do the same thing. Now if I save, I'll have links to all of these. I made the fatal error of not adding a dot before this, so let me go ahead and do that so that it's a relative path, not at the root level. So let's restart this, click over here, and now you see that Google Translate is trying to translate Latin for me. All right, so there we go. We get access to all these. Now, we don't yet have them wrapping anything, and you can see that none of my styling is taking effect, but that's what I'm going to show you in the next video. How do we add layouts to Markdown files? I'll catch you there. In the last lesson, we focused on routing, and we set up these basic blog post pages so you can click inside here and see a very poorly designed blog. Now, what we're going to do in this is figure out how we can incorporate this entire design into these Markdown files. You might remember that we added these in this blog folder right here. So individually here, we've got just Markdown with front matter from just a normal Markdown document. Now, Astro borrows the same idea and has its own front matter where you're writing JavaScript. In a sense, what it's doing when it actually grabs stuff from a Markdown file, though, is it's adding each of these as props that are passed along to a layout or an Astro component. So we need to figure out how we can actually define those Astro components. Now, what we're going to do is create a blog layout in this layouts folder. You could do it anywhere. It can be any kind of Astro component, but since it is more of a layout style component, it makes sense to add it here. So I'm going to go ahead and add this, and I'm going to call this blog post layout.astro. Now what I could do is just mimic this main layout right here. So I could grab it right here and then I could go ahead and add it here, but then I'm duplicating a lot of work again. So you might remember last time how we nested components inside of other things. So we've got like routes that are nested essentially inside of this main layout component. Well, we can do the same thing with our blog post layouts. So in other words, we can actually use this main layout and nest everything we need for the blog layout inside of that. So here's what I mean. Let's actually just steal it from one of these index pages. Let me grab this main layout right here. Essentially what we're going to do is the same thing we've been doing with our other routes, except we're going to use this blog post layout as the example. So I'm going to get rid of all of this here and just replace it here with the main layout. Let's go ahead and get rid of this as well. And then this main layout we need to actually import. I'm going to get rid of all this and come in here and say main layout. And then I'm going to get rid of all this as well. All right, so if this is my main layout, you might remember that I have a slot in the middle, and that's where all the content is going to go. And that's the same when it comes to this blog layout. So for now, I'm going to add a header tag right here. And inside here, we're going to have a div with the class of container. And then next to that, we're going to have an image. So we'll do all that in just a second. This will essentially be the header for our blog post pages. The rest of the content will be below this header. That will all be inside a div with a class of post content, and this is just so styling works properly the way I've set this up. And there'll be two things inside here. There'll be another div with a class of content, and this is where we'll actually have a slot in this component. So I'll explain this in a second if that doesn't make sense, but essentially all of this is going into the slot of the main layout, and now we've got another slot, which is where the blog content will go. Next to this, eventually we're going to have a div with the class of sidebar, and that's where we'll have a sidebar. Right now we're not going to worry about that, but just so you know, that's where that will go. Now the question still arises, how do we actually get the Markdown files to use this layout, and then how do we actually grab stuff from the Markdown files? Now a moment ago I mentioned how these right here are essentially just going to be props that Astro passes in to whatever layout component, whatever Astro component we give it. You can define what layout you want it to use simply with that property of layout. Now what we'll do is reference a relative path to whatever layout we want to use. In this case, I want to go up a level. That gets me to the pages level. I'll go up one more. That gets me to SRC. Then I'll go into layouts. And finally, blog post layout. And once again, I need .astro. And like we've done before with these Astro files, I have to add a .astro. Now when I use that, that'll actually use the content in post 1 here so that it uses this layout. So if I come back over here, how do we get stuff from it? Well, remember, all that front matter from my Markdown file is passed as props. It's passed as one object called front matter. So if I say const, all I'm going to do is grab the front matter like this from my astro.props. Now there's actually an interface you can grab from Astro. It'll give you a lot of the stuff that you get here, but for now what I'm going to do is just console.log this so you can see it. I've just got an extension that prints that out quickly for us. So I'm going to save this here and we're going to come into post 1. Now already you can see it actually took on the effect of the blog. If I go back and go to post 2, that's not using that layout, you'll see that did not take on that effect. So if I come over here, now that I'm here, where am I going to see this log? Think about it. Would I see it over here on the client, or am I going to see it in my server side terminal? Well, because all this stuff up here in an Astro component is server side or on the build, then I'd actually see it down below. And in fact, if I open up my terminal, that's exactly what I see. Now, what am I getting here? I'm getting all the front matter and other stuff. So let me show you what I've got here. So I'm getting the title, the date, the author, the image, the description, draft, category, all of that is stuff that I wrote. Then I'm also getting file, URL, and then I'm getting an Astro object. So these 3 down here are not things that I passed in, they're things that are provided for me by the framework itself. So we would use it very much in the same way like we'd use any props. That means I can take this title and pass it in right here. So I'd have to do front matter dot title. Now just like I don't want to type astro.props over and over again, I really don't want to type front matter dot something over and over again. So I'm going to actually kill all this and then just destructure all this from the front matter. So for now, all I want is the title, the description, the date, the category, the author, and the image. Now the description I actually want to pass along here as well. So I'm going to say description, and that reminds me, now that I have this just as title, I can just pass it in like that. And both of those will be passed to the main layout, which will then in turn be passed down to the head and eventually show in the head of my document. Now let's go ahead and save this and then fill out the rest of this content. Now inside this container, I'm going to have things like the category, the title, and then the author and date. So let's add those all one after the other. I'm going to add the category in a small tag. This is just going to be a link. And in this case, I'm going to template out with a template string here, slash category, and then slash, and here in a template string, I'll just say the category. I'll give this the class of badge so that it will pick up my styling. And then inside here, I'm going to have category. Now, if I save this here, you'll see it pull in right up top here. And if I were to click this, obviously I don't have this route set up yet, but if I click it, you'll see I get reference docs showing right here, and it's actually turned it into like a URL param as it needed to. I actually want to change it a little bit so it looks more like this. And so we'll just write our own little custom function here in a second so that it looks the way I want it to. For now though, I'm going to come just below the small tag and add an h1 tag with a class of h2. And inside here is where I'll add my title. If I save that, you see that pulls in. And then finally, I'll add a paragraph tag, and this is going to say by, and then I'll have an anchor tag. And much like we did up top, I'm going to go ahead and template this out. So I'll say dash author, and then once again, I'll pass in the author here, and I'll pass in the author here. In other words, I want them to be able to click on the author and get to an author's page with all of their posts that they've already written. Now, outside the anchor link itself, I'll do a space, and then with option and 8, I'll get that little dot. And then finally, I want to pass in the date. If I save it here, this doesn't quite look the way I'd expect it to, so we'll fix that too in just a second. First, I want to show you what this author link looks like. If I click in here, it's done the same thing. It's created this URL scheme for me, this param, and passed it in with that %20 for this space. So I actually want to customize this as well. So both of these should take the same function, and it will basically slugify whatever that is. Now, there may be a way to do this in Astro naturally. I didn't know if there was or not, but it's just JavaScript, so we can do that ourselves. Now, we do have a JavaScript folder, so if I pull this open over here, we're going to add another file in here. We'll just call it utils.js. And to start with, I'm just going to go ahead and paste this in because it's kind of long and arduous, but basically just search for a slugify function if you want online, or you can copy this from the GitHub repo. Just look at lesson number 7, that branch, and you should be able to steal this from that utils.js. What we're doing is taking text, we're then turning it to a string, lowercasing it, and replacing anything we can find. So spaces get replaced with dashes, double dashes get replaced, a bunch of stuff like that, and you can see how in the end it's going to give me a slugified text string. Now, how do we get this in here? Well, we actually pull it in up top. So let's come in here and we'll just say like utils imports or something like that. Here I'm going to import slugify from, and this is a relative path. So I'll go up a level into JS and then finally grab my utils. It means if I save this and grab this right here, I can just wrap both the author and the category in this. So it's this one right here inside the URL. I'll just say Slugify and then add author in parentheses as the argument that I pass in. We'll do the same thing up top here. This time I'll grab both of those together and first add the parentheses and then come over here and paste Slugify. So if I save that and I come back over here, if I click on reference docs now, it'll actually give me this slugified URL. Same thing if I come over here, I click on that, same thing, I get Darnell as a slugified URL. Now these are both eventually be routes like this inside of an actual page, so I'm going to grab both of these by holding Option and clicking both of those and adding a / there. Now there's another helper function we need, and that is to transform this date to something that looks like human readable. So we'll do that again, and I'm going to open back up this utils.js. Here let's just custom write this one, it's not too bad. I'll say function, and let's call this something like format date. I'm going to take a date in, and I'm going to return a new date that uses my date to start with, and then I'm going to use a method that lives on that called toLocaleDateString. I've done some videos on this before. I love this INTL API that we have in the browser now. You can do so much cool stuff with it. What I want to do is I want to pass in as the first argument the locale. Now if this was client side, I'd probably pass this in as undefined, and that way it would basically figure out how to style it based on their locale, and that may be your preference to style it in that way. However, since I'm just doing this on build, I'm just going to use my locale, which is enus, like this. And then you can pass it an optional options argument. And in this case, I'm going to pass it time zone, and I'll pass it UTC. That means when I use this, it'll use the actual date that's passed in here as the date, rather than subtracting my number of hours from the UTC time. So if I come, let's see, back over here, now I just have to also pull that one in. And then I'll come down here and I want to format the date right here. So again, I'm already in a template string here, so I can just surround it like this, pass that in as an argument, and that's what we get. Now let me show you what happens if you don't pass in this optional options argument. If I remove that and hit save, you'll notice that it actually subtracts a day because I'm not in UTC time, and that's basically what it's going to be using is my locale. So it'll use the 000 for the hours, subtract my time, and so I always get the day before. So if you want it to be the day you actually write in your post, go ahead and leave it like that. Okay, so we've got two more things I want to do. Number one, I want to actually add the image down here. And then number two, I think I'd like to extract all of this into its own little component so that we don't have all this messing up or mucking up this blog post layout. So let's start with the image itself. And to do that, I want to show you another integration. This is for images in Astro. Now, technically, this is still experimental. However, I've seen that it works really well, so I figured I would share it with you, and I'm sure it will only get more stable. If I come down here, it's going to tell you a bunch of things as far as how to install it. One of the coolest things about Astro is not only are their docs awesome, but you can also get a lot of help just from the command line tools. They'll do a lot for you. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up and kill my server. Then I'm just going to grab this npx Astro add image. And as I add this, it's going to actually just walk me through the whole process. So it tells me, hey, you're going to install this. Is that good? Sure, it's good with me. Next, it's going to actually update my Astro config for me. Perfect. I don't like doing that kind of stuff anyhow. So pm run dev, I'm up and running. So just like that, it did all that work for me. Now let's kill it actually one more time because I want to show you something else we need to do. In order to use some of the features we're going to use, we also should install Sharp. So I'm going to do that. This is an image library, and I'll install it just like this. And then I actually have to do the manual work of updating my own Astro config since this is just an optional install. So I'm going to open up my Astro config, and you can see that I need to pass in this right here to the image right here. Now, just for a better experience from a developer standpoint, I can add types if I want to in two different places. Let's go ahead and just add it in that en.d.ts. And here all I want to do is replace this, as you can see, with Astro.js image client. So I'll save that, close that down, save that, close that down, come back over here and npm run dev, and we should be up and running. Now, why have I gone through the painstaking work of setting all this stuff up? I get this image and I actually get a picture component as well. Now, the reason I would want to do this is because I can resize it, I can encode it differently if I'd like to, I can add customizations like filter or blur, I can also do a bunch of other cool stuff with that Sharp library that we installed. Now, why would you want to do that? I think some things are better shown than told. So let me show you what I've got here. I've got my image.src and my image.alt. So if I come back over here, I'll do image.src, and over here, I do image.alt. And if I save that and I come over here, I got the image coming in, but let me go ahead and open up the network tab. We'll look just at the images and then I'll refresh. And let's get a little bit more room. You can see it's 237 kilobytes, so not too bad. Now what I want to do is replace this with a more optimized image. And I'm going to do this with this Astro Image plugin. So if I come over here, there's a bunch of things you can pass in. An SRC is required, you can see. Same thing with an alt. You don't have to pass in a format, but anyhow, there are a bunch of different options. I'll let you kind of poke through these as you want, but let's just go ahead and just use this in real life. So I'm going to come over this way, and the first thing I need to do is import that library component. So I'll just say like library import, and I'll grab the image and the picture. Now for now, just to keep it simple, I'm just going to import the image itself, but you may want to use that picture element, and you're welcome to do that. Then what I'm going to do is come down here and replace this right here with image. Now, those two things I passed in are great, but there are a couple of other things required by this image component that are not required by the normal image tag in HTML. One of those would be either a width or a height, so I'm going to give this 1200, and then I'll go for a height, we'll do 600. So you don't have to do this. These are the dimensions of the image, though, for all of these, so I'll just go ahead and do that. Now, I can also pass in something called a format. I mentioned that a second ago, and I can basically pass it any format I want. So I could do avif like this, I can do webp, and it will just transform it on the fly for me. So for now, let's start with avif. So let me go ahead and save that. And immediately you see I'm down to 31.6 kilobytes immediately. Isn't that pretty cool? Now I can come back here and say webp. This one's 57, so maybe I stick with avif because it's a little bit smaller. Hey, nice, right? And you can see it's adding in all this at the end just to show that it is transforming it, and you see all the transformations right on the image itself. So significant reduction. I don't know, 5, 6, 7 times the reduction, and you can see how the quality is still pretty good. Now I can actually pass in additional things here. So another option I have is the fit, and in this case I want this to be a cover. I can also pass in quality, and it will actually minify it for me essentially on the fly. This needs to be a number, so I'm going to pass it in like this. I can even pass in something like an aspect ratio. So here let's do like 5/2, and I can also pass along things like the class. So I'll say I want this to have a class of hero image, which I think that just adds a little bit of like shadow on it if I remember correctly. So there we go, that's the little shadow it added, and it did all the rest of this stuff for me as well. I'm not sure if we actually lost any quality or size. Now it looks like it actually is slightly bigger. I'm not sure the reason for that, but not too much bigger, so I'm happy with that. So that's pretty amazing. Just like that, with this little tiny component, I can very quickly minify my images using this. Now, obviously, you may want to make this a little bit more performant and add different sizes for different screens and all that, but I'll let you figure that out. For now, all I need to do is go back to all of my posts and add this exact same layout tag. I've left a blank space at the top of all these, so I'll let you do that, and I'll do the same, and then we'll be right back together. All right, there's 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. I'll kill all of those, and now let's move back to the blog itself, just to show that that's working for all of them. If I go to post 2, now it should pull this in, and there's my image. Post 3, same thing, all of these work, and you can see how all these are just dynamically being passed in. The title up here is even changing because I'm passing in that prop down here to the main layout. Pretty cool how you can just use these components, start nesting them, and then even pass Markdown files a layout to use when they're rendered. Now we've got just one more thing to do, and that is I actually want to extract all of this logic out to its own component. So I'm going to grab the header right here, all the image stuff right here. We'll grab all of this out, and we'll call this something like post header. Now before I save it, let's come over this way, and in our components, let's add that post header.astro. And to start with, I'm going to add that front matter up top, and then down below, I'm going to paste in all the stuff we just grabbed. Now, this obviously needs all of these things in here, so let's go ahead and do that. So we'll say const, I need the category, I need the title, I need the author, I need the date, and I need the image. And all these things come from astro.props. Now I also have some imports. You can see I've got these 2 JavaScript imports, and then I also have the image import itself. So let me come back over here, and I'll just steal those from right here. So let's get rid of this. Actually, let's grab the comment as well. And I saved it prematurely, so we're going to have it yell at us. That's okay. Let's see. I need to come out here and then down to JS, so that works. The other thing I need to do is grab this library import right here. So I'll copy this out like this, come over this way, and do the same thing. Now it's still going to yell at us because post header isn't defined, and then we won't have passed it any of those props yet. So let me go ahead and get rid of this, And let's retype this in now that I've got that post header so that I don't have to manually type all that. Up top, if I hit enter, it should import it for me, and it does. That works for me. Now I need to go ahead and pass this all the things it needs. Now there's a couple of different ways I could do this. I could just leave the front matter here and just pass the whole front matter down and do this whole song and dance inside that post header. Or since I've already destructured all these, I could just pass them in like this. So title, description, date, category, and finally image. And let's see, I guess there was one more too, right? Author. Okay, so there we go. So we've now extracted all this logic out to its own component right over here, grabbed all this stuff in, and then basically just used the same content we already had there. So here I am, all of it's working. These things are slugified. This date is prettified. Everything is working as we'd expect. And we've even minified this image here. Now I'm not going to do this here, but maybe you want to take this right here and apply it to the About page. That's the only other page where we've used an image, except at this point so far we've not minified this. So see how much you might save with this image import. Now, if I come over to the blog page, you'll remember that we just hard-coded this here. Obviously, that's not the way you're supposed to do it in Astro, but I wanted you to be able to quickly navigate to it while we were building all of this out. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to create a card component and then how to fetch all those Markdown documents in the front matter of our blog page. This is where working with Astro starts to get really fun, and I hope to see you there. In the last video, we set up these blog posts to use a new blog post layout so that they actually include all the images, all by default. They use our custom styling. What we want to do now is actually loop through these things live so that we don't have to manually write these here. You might remember last time inside this blog directory, we have an index.astro page, and we just hard-coded all of these values. Now that's not how you're supposed to do stuff in Astro, because then every time you add a new blog, you have to come over here and manually type it. Plus this kind of looks nasty, so how do we actually dynamically run through or loop through all the data from our blog posts? Well, let's go ahead and get rid of all this to start with. And actually, I'm going to get rid of these ULs as well. Just so we know we're here though, I'll add blog, and then let's come up top here because this is where the magic is going to happen. Capital A Astro is where we get the props from, and there are a couple other options you have, a couple other methods. One of those is a .glob. So what we can do is use a .glob and then get all of the content from a page using that. So all I have to do is say const all posts, let's call it something like that, and I'll say await, and you might remember that this is top level await because this whole thing is technically wrapped in an async function. So I can say astro.glob and then come right inside here, and all I want to do is use a relative path to the pages. All I have to do is like this, and then give it this asterisk to say anything with an MD file on it. Now if I go ahead and I console log this and save it, this console again is going to show up in the local terminal here in VSCode. If I come down here, you can see I'm getting back a bunch of stuff, and let's see, let me scroll all the way down here. Here we go. All right, so I'm getting a front matter, I'm getting file, I'm getting URL, raw content, all this kind of stuff. Several of these things are just getters, so they can get me that content. Here's the content of the actual post. This front matter is just what I get in the front top of the Markdown files. Now, if you're using MDX, you would just do MDX, and it would get you the same stuff. So I get access to a bunch of different things in here. So we can use this content to actually loop through these items and display blog posts. And to loop through these things, again, I put them in bracketed syntax, and I'll simply say all posts. And all I want to do is map over each post, and I can say for each post, I'm going to pass it to a new component we're going to call post card. It's going to be self-closing, and I'm going to pass it one thing to start with, and that is simply the post itself. Now, this doesn't exist yet, so I'm going to try to resist the urge to save, come up here and add this as a new component. So we'll say post card.astro, and inside here we'll have some front matter. We know that this at least needs to get the post here from astro.props. And as we saw, it's going to have a front matter property, front or post.frontmatter.title, so that it will display the title for the post listed out. So I'm going to save this here, come back over this way. Before I save this, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this, change both of these with Command D to grab both of those and do post card.astro. This just needs to be changed then to components. And I think Astro should be happy. Let's save it and see what happens. There we go. Look at that. All my titles just listed out there for me. Now, let's actually style this a little bit differently. So let me come back into this postcard and actually use what we're getting in here. Now, if we're not sure, once again, let me just grab these like this. And maybe in this case, let's get rid of this so we only have to look at one console log. Here we'll just have post card. We'll say post is equal to, in this case, all posts. And I just want the first one. We'll pass that in, and that way we're just getting one. So if I come back over here and save, and I open this up, scroll all the way down, this is what we're getting for each post. The front matter, the file, the URL, all this kind of stuff. Now, a lot of these things we're not going to use because I'm not wanting to display the content of the post. I just want to display the front matter, the image, that kind of thing, because these are just going to be cards on the main blog page. So maybe let's change this to a pre-tag, and then let's take this front matter object here and json.stringify it, and I'll pass it null and 2, and that way it formats it for us. So here we go. This is what we're getting back. That will help us as we're building this out. Now I want this to look a lot kind of like the front section of those blog posts themselves. So let's open that post header that we created last time. And actually, maybe I'll just copy, let's grab all of this because I think I'll need a lot of that. We'll add this up top here. And then I'm going to grab all of this. We're not obviously going to use a header tag, but that's okay. I'll add that down here. Now you'll notice I don't actually have access to these at the top level because I need to destructure them from the post itself. So I'll say const. Here I've got title, date, author, image, description, and category. Now all of these are going to come from the post. Now if I come down this way, it looks like all my red squigglies are mostly gone. So if I save it, let's see what happens. Nope. All right, it tried. It looks like it's trying to slugify something that isn't a string. However, if I look down at category and author, those are both strings, which means I think the problem is this needs to be post.frontMatter. So I'll go ahead and save it, and there you see it's actually displaying. Now, obviously, this is not what I want it to look like, so it's kind of stretching everything because the styling is not meant for that. So let's go ahead and change around the styling now. I want this to be an article, and I'm going to give this the class of card. Now, you do need to make sure that the article changes on both. I've just got VS Code set up to where it will change both at the same time. Next, I'm going to get rid of this container right here. We don't need that. And I'll save that, and I want to actually change around a couple other things, so I'm going to take the image itself. Let's get rid of this. And come up just below the small tag. And here I actually want the image to be inside of this anchor link. Now this href, I need to actually point somewhere, but we'll get to that in just a second. For now, I'm going to pass in this image right here and change around a couple of these things. So the width here is going to be just 400 now. The height will be 250. avif is fine, or maybe let's say webp just for kicks. We're going to change this to 4/1 and get rid of the class. Now before we save or do anything else, let's think about this right here. Where am I going to get the URL from? If I come back over to my index page in my blog directory, you might remember that I get a bunch of things when I loop through this. This post includes a URL, and it includes that front matter object that we've been using. Those are really the only two things I need from it, so rather than passing everything down here, why don't I just change this up a bit? So I'm going to change this to front matter, and this to .front matter. The other thing I want, though, is a URL. This will be all posts. In this case, since we're still just grabbing the first thing, I just want the URL off of that. Now it should yell at me if I save it because I don't have those things in here. So let me come over here and I'm going to change this to front matter and URL. That means I don't need all of these post.frontMatter. So if I hit Command-Shift-L after grabbing one of those, I can just remove all those at the same time to have them just say front matter. All right, there we go. It's looking a little bit more like we want it. That means I can take the URL and add it as the href right here. So URL, this comes directly from that glob import that I already got. Now, if I look at all the rest of these things here, the layout, I don't really need that. Title, date, author, image, these are all the same things as what I pulled in from my header itself. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this pre because I don't need that anymore. And then let's come down here and change a couple other things. Now, just below the link, the anchor tag, I want to add another div with the class of content like this. And then I want to take all of this and move it inside. Now we've got a couple things to think about here. This is an H1 tag. I don't need more than one H1 tag on the page. And I should have something on my blog page that would be an H1 tag. So each of these might be H2 tags, for instance. But I might also want this somewhere else where it might be an H3 tag. So I want to actually make this tag dynamic. How do you do that? Well, there is a way to do that. If I come up top here, what I'm going to do is pass in another prop here. We'll just call this tag type. And I'll pass that in as like an H2 or an H3 or whatever I want it to be. Then I can say const tag with a capital T equals tag type. Now this might seem a little bit weird, but basically we have to take what we're passed in and add it down here so that we can then use this as a component down below. That means I need to come over here and pass that tag type. And here I'm going to pass it in as an H2 in this case. So I'll save that. I'll come back over this way and save this. Now what I can do is I can use that tag right here. So on both of these, if I hit Command D, I can grab both of those. I'll just type tag. Now, nothing much changed because the styling is still an H2, but if I come in here, you'll see this is now an H2 tag. And it's pulling this in dynamically from what I passed in up above. Now, because this is a card, I actually want this to be styled a little bit differently. So first of all, I'm going to change this to an H3 for styling. Then I'm going to add a link. The href itself will point to the same URL that the image pointed to because they're both pointing to the same post. And then I'll simply pass in the title here. Just below here, I'm just going to change this paragraph tag to a small tag. Now I want to wrap all of this right here inside a div. So if I hit Command-Shift-P and hit wrap with abbreviation, I can just type div. This will separate it off with the styling because just below this, I want to add as another child of that content class, another section. That would be a paragraph, and inside here, I just want my description to show. Finally, just because this is a nice little use case and we already created our link component, it's really easy to pull in that link like this. And let me just make sure that imported up top the way I want it to. So I'll scroll up top here. Yeah, so let's put this, I guess let's do something like this. Let's do component imports. And then what I need to do is add in all the things that are required by this link that we created. Because we typed it, if I hit Control and Spacebar, I get all of those once again. So for my href, what do I want this to point to? Well, my URL. The text itself, I just want it to be a string. We'll say something like a read post. For the style, we want this to be secondary. And then I'm not going to pass in an icon, although if you wanted to pass in like a read icon or something like that, you could do that. Well, let me shut this down, and now you can see we get all of this nice styling. Now, the default focus states I've created on this site, you can see if I tab through it, I get this nice little banding effect. That means if I also come to the image, I get that. I don't really know that they need to like click on the image that way. I just think it's common for sighted users to click on an image to go to the post. So I want them to be able to click on either of these or this. And then obviously this would take them to the author's page. This would take them eventually to the category page. So I actually want to remove this banding here. So let's come back up top here, and I'm going to add a couple of things here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this out of the normal flow of the tab indexing. I think this is okay for accessibility. Please correct me if I'm wrong here. Accessibility to me is kind of a black box, and I've been on a journey the last several months to try to understand it more. So if this isn't kosher, let me know. I'll go ahead and save this, and that should remove that from the tab indexing. If I move back over this way, though, to my blog index, I want to change around a couple of other things. First of all, we have to loop through all of these posts to start with. So let's go ahead and just comment this out for reference. So we've got it here. I'll come back to our all posts and uncomment this. In this case, what I want to do is just make sure that I pass this front matter, and I want to pass this my post.frontmatter. I'll also pass my URL, which is just my post.url. And then finally, in this case, I want to pass a tag type, and this I'll pass as my H2. Now you could also set a default tag type if you want to. I didn't do that in this case so that you don't have to pass this in, so it'll actually have a tag no matter what. That might be even a wiser option than what I've done here, but I think for now I'm going to leave that as is. So if I save that there, you see that these all come in. There's a little bit more styling that needs to happen, and that's based on a parent container here. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to grab all of this and hit Command-Shift-P again, wrap with abbreviation. I want a section here, and then I'll do a dot for a class and do a container. I'll go ahead and add all of that, and then inside here I want to have an ARIA label so that it calls this out as a region. We'll say new blog posts. And then below here, since this is the main content of the page, I want this to be an H1. We'll give it a class of H1. It'll say new blog posts. Finally, I'm going to reselect this loop here, hit Command-Shift-P, and wrap with abbreviation. And here I want this just to be a div with post container. So if I save that, now I get some more of that styling that we were hoping for. You can see all this laid out perfectly. I mentioned a couple times in this series that you've got to follow all my instructions exactly if you want it to look this way, and that's so that we don't have to mess with styling this whole project. Now, one of the dumb decisions I made was to make the postcard here, this image itself, need an ARIA hidden equals true here, because I guess if they're not tabbing to it, I don't want them to see it either, just to focus on the content of the text. Again, this might not be good for accessibility, but it actually styles things the way I want, because I guess that's how I set this up, which is kind of dumb. All right, so there we go. Now this is actually styled the way I want it to be, and you can see that I've got all my posts coming in just as you'd expect. Now, if you're observant, you may notice that this goes from 11:20, this is 12:25, or 11:25, 12:03, 12:09, so it's actually going in reverse. In addition to that, if I were to come in here, and let's go ahead and look at one of the posts like this. Let's take this first one and set the draft to true. Astro will not build this in the sitemap, which we'll get around to looking at in a later video, but it will actually still display everywhere on your site that you're using a glob to get it. I don't know if they're planning on changing that, but at least for now, you have to actually manually filter all of these out. In addition to that, if I come in here and do like 1220 on this one, it's still going to show, and you see it shows here at the top, 1220 up here. So this is now 1220, this is 1125, so they're not in any order as far as this is concerned. They're just grabbing the first one, then the second one, then the third one, and whatever the dates are, it doesn't really matter. So in the next video, we're going to write a custom function that will reduce all of the stuff we're getting and actually allow us to customize how we get back data. We're going to use that custom function all throughout. Now, I've mentioned at the very start that you need to have an understanding of JavaScript. This is probably the most complicated thing we're going to do with JavaScript, but I have full confidence you'll be able to follow along. Sound good? All right, let's jump into the next video. So we've got everything up and running where it's actually showing our blog posts, and we're dynamically grabbing all of those from the Markdown files. However, last time I mentioned that if you change around some of the metadata in a file, like for instance, you change a draft to true or change the date, you might notice that it's just picking up the first post and the second post. And if for some reason they're out of order or something like that, or you want to exclude something from the future, for instance, like this date has not yet happened as I record this video, you'll actually need to filter that out manually. Now, there may be plans to change to this in Astro. Maybe it's already happened, but I haven't seen it. So I want to show you how you might do this with JavaScript. And one of the cool things about all this front matter when it comes to Astro components is you can run JavaScript directly in there. So let me open back up an index.astro page in our blog directory, and we're pulling in all the posts right up here. Now, what if we could grab these posts, and before we loop through them, we could format them according to whatever we need on the page? Well, we can do that, and we're going to do that in our utils.js. So I'm going to come down here, we're going to write a custom function. We're just going to call this format blog posts. And it's going to take in a couple of things. If I come over here, we want it to first of all take in our posts. And then we also want to take in an optional options argument. Now it's important that it's optional, so let's go ahead and do equals and then an empty object. So it doesn't have to pass in anything, but if we do, it'll override that empty object, obviously. So we're going to have 4 different things you can do on here. We'll say filter out drafts to start with. We'll set this to true. Then I'm just going to copy this down and we'll say filter out future posts in case you want to do that. Next, I'm going to have sort by date. We'll set this to true as well. And then finally, we can have a limit. So limit by whatever number you want. And to start with, we'll just set this to undefined. Then what I want to do is actually reduce all the posts based on these criteria right here. To start with, however, let's go ahead and just console.log the posts just so we see exactly what we're getting. And I'll go ahead and save this here. Let me then jump over this way, and we need to import this. So I'll come up here and say like utils imports or something like that. And we will import format blog posts from, and I need to go up again, finally into JS, and finally into utils. Then I'm going to come over here and we're just going to say const formatted posts equals format blog posts, and I'm going to pass it all my posts. So if I save it here and then I open up my local dev server, I'll scroll down to the bottom, you'll notice that I'm just getting a console log of all the posts that are being passed to it. All right, so just so we know it's actually getting there, now we've got it down this way. Now let me go ahead and jump back over this way because obviously we don't want to just console log. I actually want to get back from this a single value, and that would be whatever my formatted posts are, whatever I want them to be in whatever component I've called this. So I'm going to say const, and then we'll call this filtered posts. And I want this to be a post.reduce. Now, if you're not familiar with the reduce method, I've done a pretty long video explaining how it works, or maybe not long, but hopefully in depth. I think it's like 15 minutes or so. And then I've also done a JavaScript challenge video on my channel where we actually work with the reduce method a lot. The long and short of it is that with reduce, unlike things like map, I don't have to get back an array. I can actually shape the data however I want, loop through it, and as I'm looping through it in a single time, filter out what I don't want all in one go. And at the end, I get one thing back. So what I get is this accumulator and the thing I'm looping through. So in this case, I guess this needs to be posts, and then for each post, so this would be like in a map, you get each of those, but the very first thing you get, the first parameter here, is the accumulator, or the thing that you're going to pass to the next iteration. There's one more thing to give it, and that would be an array, because in this case, I actually do want an array back. Now, the very first thing I want to do is look at what I need from this. The only things I'm really concerned about are the date and then the draft status, because these both use the date. This would not be related to the front matter or anything else I pass in. It's just a number I can pass in if I want to limit how many I get back. So I just need those two things. So let's go ahead and grab those. So I'll destructure these. We'll grab the date and I'll grab the draft status. we'll grab these from the post.frontMatter. Next, let's just kind of work through our list. So we want to filter out drafts if true. So I need to check two different things. I need to check if filter out drafts is true. So if that is true, and then inside of this, I need to say if the draft itself is set to true. So if it is a draft, if both of those things are true, I don't need to check anything else. This should not belong in my final array. So I can just return the ACC. Now the very first loop through, the ACC will be set to whatever I put down here. In this case, it's going to be set to the empty array. So it's going to just pass on an empty array on the very first loop through, because in this case, I know for a fact that this is set to draft. So it should already get rid of this and it won't return it at the end. Now I've got some other conditions to check for. So I can say filter out future posts if true. And here I'll just say if filter out future posts, if that is true, and a new date from the date I passed in. So this would be from the actual post itself. It's that if that is greater than today, then in that case, also I want to return the ACC. So in this case, if it got past this, but the post is in the future, so if I set this to false so that the draft was not true, but the post is still in the future, it should now kick out of it at this point. Now at this point, those are the only things that are actually going to kick things out of the final array. So I want to actually add the post to the accumulator. So we'll say add post to ACC. In other words, at this point, if you got through both of those checks, I want you to be part of the ACC. So I'll take that empty array at this point on the first loop, and then I'll push into it my post. And then finally, I'm going to return the ACC. If I come over here, I should actually have down here a filtered posts. This filtered post should have kicked out any drafts, and it should have kicked out any future posts. Now there's two more conditions that I need to worry about. This sort by date, that's set to true by default, and the limit as well. So here I'm going to say if sort by date. If that is true, then I want to take my filtered posts here. I want to dot sort them, and I'm going to take the first and the second and then just keep looping through them as we get going here. And I want to compare their dates. Now there's a couple different ways to do this, but I'm just going to say new date, and I'll say b.frontmatter.date minus new date a.frontmatter.date. What that should do is loop through each of these and compare them. If it's positive, it will put one in front of the other. If it's negative, it'll reverse that. And in the end, I'll get a sorted back item based on the dates that were passed in. And then the way I'm going to set this up is I'm going to have an else condition. In other words, if sort by date is not true, I just want to randomize it, all right? Because sometimes I might want to do that. In fact, we'll do that in a later component we build. So I'll grab my filtered posts again, and this time I will sort. And the function I will pass it here is just math.random. This isn't like truly random, but it's not a huge deal for what I'm using it for. And we'll do by like 0.5. So half the time it'll be positive, half the time it'll be negative. So it'll just alter their order. So we could say something up here, since we didn't leave a comment, sort by date or randomize. Either way, something will happen. Now finally here, I need to limit if number is passed in. So because we have undefined up top, maybe the easiest thing to do is just do a type of check. So we could say type of limit if that equals a number. And then here I just want to return filtered post.slice, and we'll go from 0, so the very first item in the array, to whatever limit that we passed in. If it's not a number, then I just want to return the entire thing, so we'll return filtered posts. Now, it's quite possible we did something wrong in all of that, but hopefully that makes sense. And I'll come back over this way, and now I want to grab all these formatted posts. Let's, instead of mapping through all our posts, let's map through just the formatted posts, and if I do that, it removes that first one. You can see also it formats them according to the date that they were written, so all the way through the top number right up here, 12.6, and it gives me just the first 4. Now, why is it giving me only the first 4? Well, if I come over here to my post.1, it's because a lot of these posts are actually in the future from when I'm writing this. So let's change this back like this. If I save that and I come over this way, I should now have 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I think this is the one right here. Now let me check my post 6, because I think that one could be in the future from where I stand. Nope, let's check post, maybe it was post 4. Yeah, so this is in the future from where I'm sitting right now. So let's change this to something like 12.4, and then all of them should show 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so all of those show. Now let's go ahead and change one of these back. Maybe let's come over here. Let's put this in the future from where I am. So 12.9, that should disappear for us. And now what I want to do is actually change around the optional options argument. So right inside here, first of all, I might want to say filter out drafts. I might want to set this to false. So I don't think we have any set to false. So let's come back over here. Let's set this to true, that this is a draft. If I come over here now, this does not filter it out, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, I still only have 5 because that one was already not there. So that doesn't help. Let's change this to like 12 too. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so all of them are now showing because I said I wanted drafts to be present. Now the other thing I might want to pass in here is I might want to say filter out future posts, and I might want to set this to false. So if I set this to false, I come back here, change this to future date. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They're all back, even though this is in the future. That's because I've added this as a customization. Now the other thing I can do is say sort by date and set this to false so that it randomizes them. And you'll see that I just get them in any kind of random order. And then finally I can limit them. So I can limit by like 2 or something like that. So I only get 2 back, 1, 2, and because it's random, it'll just be random ones each time I refresh, I think. Yeah, so each time I refresh, it'll just be 2 different random ones. All right, so all of this that we did, which is just JavaScript, gives us the chance to basically customize what we're getting. We're going to use that throughout the rest of the project, but this video explains how to write all of this. So I'm going to go ahead and close down that utils.js. We're going to get rid of all of those for now and just go back to all posts listed out. And I'm going to go ahead and change this post 6 back to something like 12.3 so that it shows for me. So I've got all 6 posts now showing. Let me just double check. I guess this also needs to be changed back to false. All right, so as you were, they should all be fairly similar. I think I just changed the date on one of those. Now here's the cool thing. Because we've created all of this here, it's really easy to now reuse all of this anywhere we want, including like on the home page. So that's what we're going to do next. So let's go ahead and customize the home page, and then we'll call this video done. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this entire section right here. So we'll just copy this out, and then I will go ahead and open up the index.astro page at the main root. So this is at the root level of my pages directory, and I'm just going to paste this directly in here. Now we obviously need a few things, so let's go ahead and grab those. Let's grab this, and let's see, do we need to pass this? Yep, and then I also need this, like that. Okay, so let's come back over here. We're going to have to change exactly where these are pulling from, but that should mostly work. So this is a component. It doesn't need to go up quite that high, and same thing here as well. Now here for this glob import, I need to change this slightly because I need to go inside now my blog directory and then grab all my Markdown files. Now if you want to, you could do something like this to grab anything in subdirectories, but I don't have my project set up like this, so this works for me. Now in this case, as I come down this way, I actually want to change this up because this shouldn't really be my H1 for this page, so I'm going to change this to an H2. But I want to keep the size about the same, which is why I separate those two so that the class can style it and the semantic tag can be the right tag for that section. The other thing is, since this is an H2, this now needs to be an H3 because it's now these sub items in this larger section. So let me save that, and I'll jump over to the home page, and we should see something very similar, which is it pulls in all the same stuff. So it looks very similar. Now, one thing I want to do is on my home page, I really only want 3 to come in. So I could slice it directly in here, but because I'm already manipulating the data, we already set up that limit, I can just say limit is 3. And now on the home page, I should only ever get 3. By default, it's going to give me the most recent 3, and by default, it's going to filter out all my drafts, and it's going to filter out future posts. And just to make sure that you're getting the exact same thing, let me go back to that post 4 and just make sure I change this back to like 12.9 so that I'm only getting 5 right now because of where I'm at in history. You might need to change one of these to be in the future so that as we write other things, you just know that everything is working properly. But for now, that's what I'm going to do so I can show you stuff later with that. Now, the other thing I want to do is grab my About page, and I want to use a lot of this stuff over there as well. So I'm actually going to grab all this section as well. Obviously, I would probably style the homepage a little bit differently if I was doing this from scratch, but for now, I just want to go ahead and get something up and working, and this is what we're going to use on this project. So you can see here when I paste this in, I need to go ahead and grab my link and make sure that that is imported as well. So I'll just copy this down, grab both of those, and change this to link, and that way it shows up down below. And let's see, I think all the rest of this is fine. Maybe let's shorten this as if it were like a short paragraph. And then let's change this to something like learn or like say hi or something like that. So I'm going to wave and then say like say hello. In this case, I am going to leave this at an H1 because it'll kind of be the main thing on the page. And there you go right here. Say hello, my blog, all that is set up and ready to go. Maybe I actually want to change this. Let's change this to secondary. And maybe we turn on the outline. Let's try this. So we'll say is filled. We'll set this to false. And we'll set the border visible here to true. How do we like that? Not great. All right, let's get rid of that. Let's just go back to the secondary like that, okay? Maybe we say like about me or something like that, and let's point this to our about page. So if I were to click on this, it takes me to the About page, which happens to be basically the same thing, but it's just a sample blog. Okay, so I've got 3 blog posts on the front homepage. I've got my About page done. I've got my blog page basically done. What more could we have? Well, it turns out there's a lot more we can do. This is the basics for sure, and I hope it's helped you. In the next video, we're going to talk more about dynamic routes and how we can set up some custom stuff for these reference pages right here, these categories, and then also the author pages. There's some really cool things you can do in Astro, and that's what we're going to look at next. So we've got just about every route we need on our site done and ready, except we've got a couple things we haven't touched. This right here in all these cards, these point to an empty area that says category / whatever the name of the category is. We've also got the same thing for the people. So we want to actually list this out instead of just showing our 404 page. So we can do that. We can create those dynamic routes in a couple of different ways. So I'm going to show you the more manual way and then probably the smarter way to do this. So I'm going to come inside here, inside of our SRC. Let's see, let's go inside the pages right here. And I'm going to create a new folder. We'll just call this category so that we can have a subroute essentially of category. Now inside here, I'm going to create a file and I'm going to surround this in brackets. We're just going to call this category. You can call it whatever you want, but I'm going to call it category like that. And what this will do is basically any route inside of here, any subroute, will use this bracketed syntax to decide what it should display. So I think Next actually does this as well, and it might be borrowing from Next if I'm remembering correctly. But what we can do is up in the front matter, write a function called getStaticPaths. And then we'll basically generate those static paths for us whenever somebody visits a subroute of category. So we'll say export, and this needs to be an async function. We'll say function get static paths. This is something that Astro gives us. This is going to return then an array of static paths. Now this array will be a collection of objects. The objects can have 2 things. We can pass in a parameter here. This will be an object itself. And then we'll also pass in a props. Now, basically what this is going to do is every time somebody visits a subroute, it's going to check one of these and output it, where down here, we can grab const and whatever our name of the thing is from astro.params. And we haven't used params yet because we haven't had dynamic routes yet. We have, however, used props. So both of these are things that we can pass down like here. And we're going to leave these alone until we name them up top here. So let's go ahead and name them first. So what I'm going to do is manually type all the different categories I have, and I'm going to name them category. The param is the URL I want it to go to. And you might remember that if I just pass in the category name itself, I'll get a %20 for any space. And I don't want that. Remember, I slugified it instead. So let's go ahead and bring in that slugify function. So I'll import slugify from up 2 levels into the JS and from utils. Now what I want to do is come over here and slugify. And I'm going to manually type here reference docs. That's one of the categories I use. Now what I want to pass in as a prop is a name. And here the name I want it to display is a reference docs. That's the param I want to pass in, not the slugified version. All I'm going to do is take this and copy it down 3 times. 1, 2, 3. I need to add some commas here, I guess, as well. So comma, comma, and comma. And then what we're going to do is just change these up. So I'm going to grab these next 2 with Command D, change this to general. This is another one of the tags or the categories I use. Grab this one, we'll change this to CSS. Finally, I'm going to grab this and change this to Astro. So those are the only categories I use in all of those blog posts. Now you can probably already see the disadvantage of doing it this way, but what I need to do now is destructure the category right here, so category, and then I need to destructure the name right here. Now, I'm not actually going to use the category anywhere. This is just so Astro knows what the URL should be, but I am going to use the name in the route. So if I came in here and just said name, now when I come over here and I click on reference docs, it should show me reference docs. If I go backwards and I click on CSS, same thing. Now, much like many of my other pages, I want this to actually use my page layout. So I'm going to actually open up my index page for my blog. And I'm just going to copy out, let's just grab all of this. And I'm going to paste this all in here. And then you'll notice I need my main layout and my postcard up top. So let's go ahead and grab both of those. So let's call this like utils. And then this will be component imports. And here I want to import my main layout. This will be from main layout. And then I also want to pull in my postcard from the same area, except this will be from components. If I scroll back down here, you'll see I still have some things like this formatted post isn't there yet, but we'll actually generate that here in just a second. So maybe let me comment this out. And I want to change this around to be dynamic. What would I want this to say? Well, this would be our name. And in fact, what I'd probably want this to say is something like posts about, and then the name, whatever the name happens to be. The title itself, I'd also want to be the same thing. And then the ARIA label here, I want to be posts about whatever the name is. So because I'm templating out here, I'll just do in like a template string here. We'll do posts about and whatever the name of the category is. So if I go ahead and save this and I come back over here, now I should get posts about reference docs. Now, if you want this to stand out a little bit more, I actually have it to where if you add a span tag around here, so Command-Shift-P, wrap with abbreviation and span, it will actually color it that purple color. So if you like that, you can do that. And I've got this set up now. Now I actually want to display cards for anything with this reference docs post. So let me go ahead and comment this out. I'm not going to save it if I can remember, because what I want to do is copy in the same stuff I did from this blog page as well. So up top here, we're going to grab all of this, including the, let's see, do I need the format blog path? I do, but I think I already have an import. Yeah, so I'll just grab it right here. So format blog post, that should also come in. Now what I do is on each page that I'm generating kind of on the fly here with this exported function, for each page, I want to loop through all the posts and then basically loop through what I have and decide if they share that same exact category. Now this is also something I could have added in as another filter point, but in this case, I thought it'd be better just to do it after the fact. So the first thing I need to do is to change this path. So this should say blog. And now what I need to do is basically figure out if they are this category's posts. So we could say const like cat posts or something like that. So this category's posts. And what I want to do is loop through my formatted posts, and I want to filter out a post if the slugify post.frontmatter.category equals the category. So it's going to return an array of posts that match this category. Now I probably should move this up above here. So I'm going to move this up above here because it's using this category. So I guess we do use it in one place right here. So on the individual page, I'm going to basically say, hey, are there any posts that match the category of the param that I'm on? Now I had to slugify it so that it matches the category since we slugified that. Hopefully that makes sense. So I'm taking all my formatted posts, which by default should filter out any future posts, should also filter out any posts that are draft, and should sort them by date. And I'm looping through those, filtering out anything that shares the same category as what's up here. Now this is why I did it after the fact, because we're also going to do the same thing for the author, and then you have a bunch of different conditions, and it's just easier to do it right after the fact here. And remember, this is just on build, so you're not worrying about client-side performance or anything like that. So now what we're going to do is take these cat posts, and that's what we're going to loop through down here. So I'll save this, and I'm being told that there are no matches that are found, and I think that's because I need to come up one more level. There we go. So these are all the ones that match this reference docs, and you can see that only reference docs show. If I change this back here to formatted posts, like this, you'll see that everything shows, which is kind of not the point. It should only be the ones that are passed in as the param. If I come back over this way and I go to CSS, same thing, it should only show the CSS posts. If I come back over here, let's see, can I find an Astro one? Yes, I can. Just had one, I guess. In generals, same kind of thing. So just to recap over here, what we've done is this get static paths function. This is going to return an array of page routes. All these routes will use the same template here that I've displayed, and obviously I'm dynamically inserting the name of whatever it is, and then looping through just the category posts that match whatever my route is in the first place. Now the trouble with something like this is that if I have another category, I have to actually manually update it here. So if I come over here to post, and I change this to something like, I don't know, pizza, or something like this, come over to blog, let's see, 1120, that should be down here somewhere. Pizza. If I click on this, you'll notice that it just basically errors out because I haven't manually added that. That means I would have to come all the way over here. I would have to add another one. This other one would say pizza, and well, now it's showing. So there's actually a better way to do this. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. We'll come back over here and change that back, and we'll get out of here. But before I show you that, I want to point out one other thing, and that is if you just go to the category route itself, so if I come in here and just go to category, you'll notice that I also get a 404 because I don't have an index.astro page at this level. So I could do the same thing I've done over here to blog and just like list off all the categories. I haven't done that in this project, but just so you know, that is not a route unless you set it up. Now, how do we dynamically generate these routes where we don't have to pass that in? Well, let's go ahead and create another folder here. We're going to call this author. And inside here, I'm going to create a file. And this time in bracketed syntax with 3 dots up front, I'm going to pass in author. And again, you can call that whatever you want, but since it is the author, I'm going to just call it author. Hey there, this is Chris from the future. Sorry to interrupt. I just noticed as I was editing this, you don't actually need the 3 dots here. Having the 3 dots allows you to have basically nested routes that are auto-generated. In this case, all we would need to do is change around the function like I'm going to show you here, and that would work even without those 3 dots. In fact, the 3 dots don't really do anything here because, again, we're not creating nested routes. We're just creating routes for the author itself. Now, if you're going to add something like pagination on this, you might want to do that, so that way you could create like paginated notes for the author. All right. Sorry for the interruption. Back to regularly scheduled programming. Let's go ahead and start with this category content right over here. And I'll just drop this in right here. All the imports should work the exact same because we're at the same level. However, in this case, when I'm returning here, I'm not going to manually type these things out. In fact, I'm just going to get rid of all this return for now. What I'm going to do is actually pull up this all post directly inside of this get static paths. I'm also going to pull up the formatted posts and pull this up as well. Now we can just go ahead and get rid of this. Actually, maybe let's bring this up and comment it out because it might be quicker to use that as a starting point, because what we're wanting to do is now get a new set of all the authors. And by default, a set is only going to include one of each item, so that's why I'm encouraging you to do it as a new set, and then we'll put that inside of an array. So I'll say const all authors. We'll use the spread syntax to do a new set. And here's where I might borrow this right here. Now we can just get rid of the rest of this. Come right inside here. The new set is going to take a formatted post and it's going to map over each post. And for each post, it's simply going to list the post.frontmatter.author. And then finally, at the very end of all this, if I can make this clear for you, we're going to .flat it. So what we've done is loop through every post that's available to us. So anything that's not in the future, that's not a draft, and that's been returned by this formatted posts right here. Then what it will do is loop through all those posts and grab the author from each one of those. If the author already exists, it's not going to include it in this set, so I'm only going to get one name per author. Now that I've got all authors in a single array, I'm going to return from this get static paths, all authors, and I'm going to map over these because in the end I want an array that I'm getting back because remember, get static paths should return an array to me. Now here's another case where I could actually use a reduce as well, but in this case I happen to write this as a map to start with, so let's just keep it with what I've got. If you want to refactor that though, you're welcome to do that. Because up here what I need to do is first of all grab all my author posts, so I'll just call it author posts, and all I want to do is take my formatted posts and I want to filter out any post where the post.frontmatter.author equals the author of the current page. Now I'll walk through all this here again in a second if that doesn't make sense. But after I've got all those author posts, then what I want to do is return 2 things. I want to return a params. This is going to have author, where I slugify the author, because again, that will be the route. It'll be a slugified route. And then the props, which are the things that get passed down there, will be both the author name. So I actually want the name itself. That's kind of what we did last time with the category name. But I also want the posts. We'll do author posts. Now all I need to do is come down this way. And in this case, I need to update this to say author, and then this needs to be posts and author name. Finally, let's change up a few things and then I'll talk through all this with you. So I'm going to grab the name, and the name with Command D each of those times, and we'll change this to author name because this is one of the props I get passed down to any of these dynamic page routes. And then here, this isn't cat posts anymore, this is just posts. Finally, both this about and the about down here, both these should probably be posts by this person, not about the person, because they're the ones who wrote the post. So let me save this, and then I'll jump over so we can actually see what's going on. So if I click Victoria Greenfield, I should get only post by Victoria Greenfield. Now this might seem like black magic, but let me talk you through this again. So what we're doing is looping through all posts and then formatting them. We've done that plenty of times. Now what I'm doing is grabbing an array with just the names of the authors. So it should look something like this. I would get an array back that says like Victoria, whatever her name is, and then like Alan or whatever his name was. So just like this, I'm getting an array just like this back. Then what I'm going to do is map through each of those and say for each person in that array, for each name, I want you to take the author name and construct an array of their posts. How do we do that? Well, we go through all the formatted posts, so all the posts we've been given, we filter out only posts that match that author's name. Then from the get static paths, I want you to return 2 things. A params, this is the URL itself, because we slugified the actual URLs going to their page. I want to slugify the end route. And then we also get props. In this case, I want both the author name and I want any posts that they've written so I can loop through those and display them out here below. Now, the advantage of doing it this way is I can very quickly generate new names of authors and nothing will change. So if I come back over here, let's go to like post 1, I don't know, and we'll change this to like Bubba. All right. And I come back over here to my blog. Let's scroll down to find Bubba. Here we go, Bubba, and it's already set up and ready to go. So I don't have to do anything special because when I come over to the author route here, it's just going to figure out whatever all the authors' names are and dynamically generate those routes based off of that. That means we've now got this reference, docs, and CSS, and any other category working. I've also got names of all the authors working as well. If I come back over here, any of these will work. Now, right now we've got just 6 posts on the blog. I'm assuming at one point you're going to get way more than 6. So at some point we need to add some pagination. And Astro provides pagination out of the box. It's actually not too hard to set up, especially now that we've set up all these custom functions and all our custom components. So in the next video, I'm going to show you how to add pagination and decide how many get put on each page, dynamically generating it for this blog page. I'll see you in the next video. Welcome to lesson 11. We are going to build out pagination in this video for Astro. You can see right over here, I've got all 6 blog posts showing for me right now, except in this case, maybe it's just 5, I can't remember, 5 blog posts, but in this case, I actually want to just show maybe 3 or something like that. I don't want to manually clip them. I actually want to create different pages as different nested blog routes. Now in this case, I've got my index page open up for my blog. Now, just like we did with our author, I actually want this to be more dynamic than just like a static index page. So I'm going to actually pull this up over here. We'll do ... and I'll just call this like blog or page or something like that. All right, so now we've got this dynamic page. Now you can see I need a get static paths function if I'm going to do it like that. So this one is actually going to be pretty easy, especially if you did the last one with me. We're going to export a sync function. We're going to call this get static paths. I'm going to pass in paginate. And this is something Astro gives me by default. And then I'm simply going to move in my all posts and I'm going to move my formatted post directly inside here. Now what I'm going to do is return out of here, because remember we have to return something, paginate like this. And I need to give this 2 things. First of all, the post itself that it should be worried about. In that case, that would be my formatted posts. And then secondly, in an options object here, I'm going to pass in page size. In this case, I'm going to do something like 3. Now each page, which might be a collection of 2 or 3 posts, in this case it's 3 posts, will be passed down to me in this dynamic route as a page. So page just like this equals astro.props. In other words, this custom function that they wrote will return it to me just like this. Now in order to see what's going on, I'm going to go ahead and grab all of this and comment this out. And let's go ahead and just console.log the page. So I'm going to refresh here and this should work. And it doesn't, and that's because I forgot when you're naming these things like this, you actually need to name this page. Alternatively, I think you can actually pass in a different option here. I forget what it is, so I'll leave that alone for now, but I'll let you figure that out. So I think you can actually customize that if you want. Now, what are we actually getting here? If I open this up, you'll notice that down below, I'm getting a list of things. All right, so this is what I'm console logging here. Number 1, I'm getting all of the pages in this route, or all the data in this route, in a data array. And then I'm getting the start, so which page starts this, the end, so the last page, how many there are, total individual posts, current page I'm on, last page, and then the URL for the current one, the next one, and if there is a previous one, it will show me that. So I can use all this to my advantage to basically create my own little custom routing based on what I'm getting passed back here from the pagination function. So let's get rid of this. I'm going to come back down here and uncomment this, but before I save it, let's go ahead and change this formatted posts. Now I know I'm getting page.data because remember the data array held all of my posts for this individual page. Now if I save that here, this should actually work. And you see I get 3 pages or 3 items back. If I change this to 2, I should only get 2. If I change it to 1, I should only get 1. What happens if I change it to 0? Well, it just spazzes out. Okay, good to know. All right, so I can tell how many I want per page. Maybe I say like 7 per page. It's only going to give me the 5 I have, but if I had 2 more, it would give me that. So let's go back to something like 3. And what I can do is just manually navigate to the next page. You might remember it was just called 2 like that. And you'll see I'll get the next 2 here. Now, if I were to go to 3, there is no 3. So if I go there, it should just put me to my 404, which is what it does. So let's actually build a little custom navigation component down here that will pass down here basically to decide whether or not it should show if we have a previous page, a next page, all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to open up the sidebar, and in the components here, I'm going to add another component called pagination.astro. Now I want to use my buttons in this component, so let's go ahead and make sure we import that. So let's say like component imports. I'll say import link from, and this is a relative path, and I'm in the same directory, so I can just grab the link.astro right here. Now the other things I'm going to pass in here are a previous URL, prev URL, and I'm also going to pass in a next URL. This is what I'm going to get in my astro.props because I'm going to pass it down. Now, and I think this is what you should do. You should have a nav tag here. At least that's how I've written this. That's my understanding. As long as you give this an ARIA label and all your other nav tags have an ARIA label. Now, we already have a primary nav. This should now be like blog pages or something like that. I think this is how this should work. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. I really want to get better at accessibility, and that's my understanding of how it works. Now, I have a couple different options here. And number one, I have if prev URL is present. So like on the first page, I won't have a previous URL, so this should never show. But if it is, why don't I go ahead and just output a link right here? Now, what do I want this to have? Well, the text here, I'd want to be something like, I don't know, previous. The href, I'd want it to be my prev URL, right? The style, in this case, I want it to be primary, which will be that dark color. I want the border visible to be true, and I do not want it to be filled. So I'm going to remove that default. And then finally, I'm going to go ahead and pass in an icon. Remember, this is an object itself. This will have a name. This is going to be from the tabular pack that comes from icons that I showed you a while ago. And this is going to be called arrow, big left line. And then finally, I'm going to have a side. In this case, because it's the previous, I want it to be on the left. That way the arrow points back to the left and it starts on the left side of the word. I'm going to save this. In case you don't know what I'm talking about, icons, let's see right here. This is where you can grab packs from, and I can basically grab any of these and just grab this and copy it and drop it right in here, and it will show because of the icon pack that we're using. Now, I'm not actually using it right here. I'm passing it down to the link, and that's where it's being invoked. So that's where I have to import that icon. We set that up several videos ago, so you can go check that out if you're a little fuzzy on how that works. Now, all I'm going to do is grab this, and I'm going to move it down the other way. We're going to change each of these, prev and prev, to next URL. Say if the next URL is present, go ahead and show that. And this should just say next, and this should say big right line. And finally, this will be moved to the right. So I'll save that, and now we actually need to invoke it here in the dynamic page route. So just below the post container inside the section here, I'm going to go ahead and add that pagination. If I start to type, the Astro plugin should go ahead and import it up top. Let me just double check that it's put it in a place that I like. Nope. Doesn't usually. All right, I'll put it up there next to my other component imports. And let's see. Inside here, I need to pass it two things. You might remember that would be the previous URL and then the next URL. Now, if I open this back up, you'll notice that it's inside of a URL property itself, and it's an object inside of that. That means my prev URL needs to be page.url.prev. And then my next URL needs to be page.url.next. Now, why am I saying page here? Well, it's because this is what I'm getting back up top. The only other place I'm using any data here is from the page.data, which is my array of different cards that I'm passing. If I wanted to, I could come back here and pass in like the current page, wherever that is. So I could pass that in if I wanted to and make that like dynamic to say like blog post page 2 or something like that, but I'm just going to leave it alone. I'll let you do that if you'd like to. Now, when I save this, everything should pull in. Let's see. There we go. So I get this next button. If I click over here, I now get a previous button. Let's go ahead and change this to like 1. So I get lots of different options here. So I've got a next. Now I've got next and prev. So I go next. And you can notice here this URL is just changing to 3, to 4, to 5. And now that's the last one I have. So I can go backwards like this. Of course, if I were to come up here and pass in as this options object, like filter out future posts and set this to false. Now I should actually get one more, 5, 6, because this future post is now showing. Well, I guess it's the very first one is now showing. All right, but I'm not going to do that, so let me get rid of that. So that's all there is to setting up pagination when it comes to Astro. Because of this nice paginate function that they have, it's really easy to then just return this, decide exactly what you want it to look like, and then create a little dynamic component that will just generate those next and previous buttons when you need them. You can now see the power of all those link components we set up and all the other components we set up. Once you set them up once, now we're using this postcard everywhere, we're using the main layout everywhere, and we just had to do it once at the very beginning of this project, and now we get all the benefit of using them whenever we want to. Now in the next video, we're going to apply a lot of the things we've learned about looping over data from those Markdown files, like right here, and And what we're going to do is output a list of tags that we can show at the bottom of these new blog posts. It will both show all the tags available on our site, or categories, not tags, and then it'll also have an option to show how many we have in each category. In the last video, we set up pagination over here. You can see I can click to the next page, and then I get this nice little next and previous button if I have a next or previous page visible. We did all of that with a pagination function we get in get static props. Now what I want to do is come over here to the blog page, and at the base of the page, I want to actually output a kind of a cloud tag right over here. Now the first thing I'm going to do is actually change this back to like a page size of 3, so I get 3 per page, because 1 per page is a lot of clicking. All right, so here we go. At the bottom right down here is where I want that. So what I'm going to do is actually start by doing all the data, the fetching and all the stuff I need in the component. So we're going to call this like category cloud or something like that, .astro. Now just a quick note, I mentioned earlier that both the author and the category actually don't have anything at their index route. So if I come over here and say category like this, there's nothing here. Same thing if I say author, there's nothing here. So we could do something very similar to what we're about to do and add an index.astro page underneath each of these. Let's see, author and category. If you're interested in that, I will let you figure that out on your own, because I'm going to show you how to do it here, and it's pretty much the same idea. So the very first thing I'm going to do is actually jump over here and grab all this, because we're going to need a lot of similar things. So inside here, I need all posts, and I need my formatted posts. Now to start with, I need to come out of the components folder. I need to go into the pages folder, into the blog, and then grab any Markdown files in there. You can see as well that I don't have my format blog post function here, so let me go ahead and import that. So I'll import format blog posts. I'll come up to JS, and then I'll grab my utils. So what I want to do is take all of my posts that I'm allowed to see, in this case, anything that's not future, that's not a draft, and it will all be sorted, which doesn't really matter for this use case. But what I want to do is take all categories here, and I'll pull this from my formatted posts. So formatted posts, and I want to map over these. Now in this case, I don't actually want to set, because I may want to count up how many I have. So we'll call this something like cat, and I'll just return cat.frontmatter.category. Now in this case, I actually want to lowercase them, because I want to make sure I'm comparing like to like. Every other time we've used these categories, they are slugified, so they're already lowercased. Here, I don't want to have 2 different tags, one with like a capitalized CSS and one with a lowercase CSS. So just to make sure they're all the same and I'm not having like similar typed tags that are just different cases showing up, I'm going to make sure I lowercase them. And then finally, just to be safe, although I think they're already flattened, I'm going to just flatten it just to double check. So let's go ahead and console.log all categories. And then I'm going to go ahead and import this in my pages directory. Now the way I've set this up, it's actually below the section and it's in an aside tag. This is kind of aside data, so I figured that was appropriate. I'll come up here, I'm going to add a class to this of container, and then I'll add an ARIA label. You could also do labeled by and point it to the H2's ID, but in this case, I'll just call it blog categories. That's actually the same thing I'm going to use for my H2 in here. This will be with a class of H3. I'll call it blog categories and close out that tag. Now finally, I'm going to import the category cloud. And then I'm going to go ahead and just copy this down right here and change both of these to category cloud. So if I save this and I jump back over this way, down below I should see blog categories, but I have yet to show any clouds. However, you might remember that I did go ahead and I console logged it, and you'll see I got reference docs, CSS, Astro General, and reference docs. So I've got 2 reference docs, everything else should be the same. So let me come back up this way. Now what I want to do is process those categories, and I want to count up how many of each of those exist. Now if you're going to reduce everything down to a single number, you should use the reduce method. So that's what we're going to do here. So processed categories, or we'll just call it process cats. How about that? We'll say all categories. So all the categories I get, that should be that array we just looked at. I want to reduce this. So reduce, I've got my accumulator and I've got my category. And I want to accumulate this all. And I think in this case, I'm just going to do it in an object because I think it'll be a little bit easier to list through the keys and the values. You could also do it in an array if you prefer that. But I'm just going to first of all check if the category exists in the ACC. So I'm going to say const value equals ACC, and I'm going to look on that object and say, hey, does this property exist of, what do I call it, category? So I'm getting that from this loop right now. Does the current loop exist? So that might be reference docs, it might be CSS, whatever that happens to be. If it doesn't, then go ahead and just pass back 0. Then below here, I just want to return from this reduce an object with a current ACC, which might be an empty object the first time through, obviously, and then after that, it could be something else. And I just want to pick out that property. So whatever the category happens to be named, like CSS or whatever, and I want to take the current value and I want to add 1 to it. And I'm just going to pass that on to the next loop. So the very first time it goes through, it's going to look at the first item in the array, which I think was reference docs, and it's going to start with an empty object right here, and it's going to say, hey, is there anything with reference docs as a property in the empty object? Well, obviously there's not, so the value is going to be 0 to start with. It's going to spread in the empty object, and then it's going to add this if it doesn't already exist, which it doesn't. So it'll be reference docs, and then the value plus 1. So in this case, 0 plus 1, so now it'll be at 1. Let me show you what the end result would be then. So console.log, processed cats, and if I open this up, you'll see what I get is an object with the name of the category as the key and the number as the value, or the number of times it's been used in all of my posts. Now there's one other thing I want to think about, which is sometimes I want it to actually display that number, which is why we did all that work just there. So we're going to write show count right here. We'll take this in as astro.props. Down here, we've just got a little bit of templating to do. So I've got a UL here with a class of categories, and I'll go ahead and close that one off. And then inside here, we're going to loop over our data. Now you might remember it's an object, so I have to do object.entries in this case because I want both the keys and the values. That would be my process cats. And now that I've got an array, I can map over them. To make it a little bit easier, I can actually destructure those if I want to into a key and a val. That would be the key over here and the value over here, whatever that happens to be. And then I can just return inside here an li, and this will have an anchor tag inside of here with a class of badge and a key, which would be the name of the tag inside of it. Now this needs to actually point somewhere, so let's point it to an href here, and we're going to actually use template string inside of here, so let's put it inside of curly braces, and we'll say / category, and then finally we are going to go ahead and slugify the key itself, because remember that's how we set up those routes. And then I'll add a final slash at the end. I don't remember, did we pull in slugify up top here? No, we did not. So let's go ahead and pull that in, slugify. I'll come down below here. And let's see, I think I closed off this parenthesis right here a little too early. This should go down here, there we go. All right, so if I come down here, I should get a list of all my blog categories, and I do, cool. Now there is actually another possibility, and that is that I would want to show the number afterwards. So let me come back over to my page. We'll come back down this way. And here I need to do two things. In the category cloud itself, I need to say show count, and this needs to point to true, because in this case I do want to show the count. And then finally, just for styling, I realized that I capitalized this, and that should not be capitalized. There we go. Now it actually styles correctly. Again, I use some of these ARIA labels for the styling, which I know makes the CSS very fragile, but I wanted to focus on Astro and not on CSS. Finally, let's come back over this way, and right next to the actual output of the key, I want to add another little template option, and that would be if show count is true, so I can just do it like that. Let's use it logical and. I just want to add a template string, and I want it to actually be inside of parentheses, so that's why I need it to be a template string, and I can just add the value like that. So you can see down below now, I have 2 and 1 and 1 and 1, so I know exactly how many are there. And if I click on these, they should show me those two posts, and it should be the same. So there's 1, there's 1, there's a general. Okay, so it's the exact number I would expect. Now you can use something very similar to this to actually set up your own like page list at the category root itself. So right here, you could set it up to where the same kind of thing shows right here. It would just show all the categories in a list, and you would use the same kind of thing here. You could do the same thing with authors. That would work the exact same way. Now, before we start turning our attention to like the sitemap and creating an RSS feed and some other things like that, I want to do one other kind of nice thing to have, and that is on each individual post, if I come inside here, sometimes it's nice to actually have a sidebar that will show those categories as well. So let's go ahead and use that same component in the sidebar. So I'm going to close this down because we don't need that anymore. I'm going to close that down as well. Now, where are all these Markdown files getting their layout from? Well, they're getting it from in layouts, and it's blog post layout. Now, I already set up this sidebar, but we have yet to put anything in it, so let's go ahead and do that now. Actually, to save us some time, let's go ahead and open back up this page, and I'm actually going to copy all of this right here, and let's just add it directly in here. All of that looks great to me. I just also need to come in here and grab that component. So let's grab this right here, and we called that category cloud. So if I save that there, you'll see the same thing comes in. Except in this case, I don't really want to show the count on these individual pages, so let's just remove that. And that way we got this that just shows all blog categories available to me. The other page itself, the actual blog page, would show how many I have in each category. Now while we're here, I want to add one more thing to the sidebar over here, and we're going to do that in the next video. That would be to display related posts. Now in this case, they're just going to be posts with the same category, but if you also had tags, you could also loop through those and then basically randomize the posts and show 2 or 3 from the top of those. So let's just do it with our categories, and I'll let you figure it out if you want to add tags or authors or other things like that, or maybe the same year it was posted. All of that's available here in Astro. So let's do that in the next video. In the last lesson, we set up this sidebar for all the individual blog posts, and it'll actually snap up here. What I want to do is now create a little section here that will show related blog posts. Now in this case, the only thing we can relate is that it has the exact same category here. So that's what we're going to be comparing. And why don't you try to do this yourself? If you followed me this far, you've got all the tools you need to recreate something like this. So let's start kind of in 2 different stages. First of all, in the blog post layout, which is where each Markdown file will basically be passed, what we want to do is get any related posts from the current post. And remember, you're going to get in the front matter, the title, the description, the date, the category, the author, the image, all that kind of stuff. So I want you to see if you can get an array of all the different posts that would match that criteria. Now, there's 2 things you need to pay attention to. It needs to share the same category, and it cannot have the same title. Now, since we haven't passed in custom URLs or anything like that, the URL is based off of the title, so no 2 posts should share the same title. And we don't want the current post to show related posts as its own post on the bottom of its own page. So you want to filter that one out and make sure that every other one that shows is just related to that category. All right, do your best and be right back with me. All right, we've done this pattern several times before, so I'm going to actually go ahead and come over here and just steal all this from the index page. This would be under the main layout, just our main index. I need to actually go up a level, then into pages, and then into blog, and that should get me in the right place. I don't have this format blog post yet, so I need to come over here and grab this as well. We'll call this something like util imports. Now in this case, I'm just going to leave it like this for now. I think that'll work. And then let's just call it like related posts. And I now need to filter through all of that for those 2 conditions. So formatted posts dot filter. We'll just call the post as it comes through this filter. And I want to check 2 conditions. One, that the post dot front matter dot category equals the category. Now this category itself I'm getting on the actual page, which means I probably also need to move this up. So I'll move this up above it. So this category here should be the same as right here. What I'm checking is if all the other posts that I'm looping through have the same category. That's the first condition. I can add another condition. If I use a logical AND here, then it's going to say both of these have to be true. And that is that the post.frontmatter.title does not equal the title that I passed in. Now, once again, this is this individual post that's being evaluated. Now, if I go ahead and save that, I should actually have something I can console log just so we can see what we've got. So if I console log this and open this up, you'll see I've got 0 related posts. Now, what am I on? A reference doc. So that's not true because I have 2. Well, hopefully you had better luck than I did. So let's see what I did wrong. All right, so I'm not seeing anything offhand. So why don't we just kind of work it backwards? So I'm going to get rid of this, and we'll see if I'm getting anything back in my formatted posts. So formatted posts like this. I'll open this up. So I am getting something here, which means the problem is in my loop right here. I think the problem actually is that I'm limiting the number of posts coming in. So it must be that the other one is earlier on. So if I comment this out, let's see if that works. Yeah, so there we go. I'm actually getting a couple of posts now. All right, so that's what I wanted. Let me go ahead and close down this console log. And then the other thing I want to do is I do actually want an option here because I don't want to sort by date. I just want to randomize this. So sort by date, I'm going to actually set to false. So that way you get a random order of these posts back, and I can randomly display several. Now, I don't want to display every possible post. Right now, I've only got obviously like 1 or 2 in each category, but eventually I'd want to slice this. So let's say slice like 0 and 3. And I'm doing it here after I've gotten back the related posts so that I don't chop off stuff like I did earlier accidentally. Now I need to pass these related posts to a new component we're going to write called related posts. All right, let's come over this way. I'm going to open this up, and inside the components here, we're going to call this related posts.astro. Up top here, I'm going to pull on a couple things. So we'll do slugify and then also format date because we're going to have both of those showing both the date and then the URLs that we need to point to. And this will be from a relative path JS utils. The other thing I know I'm going to get is my related posts. So whatever related posts I get, and in this case, I'm just going to pass the whole array of them to this thing and let this map through them. This will be from my astro.props. I'm going to go ahead and save this and jump back over to my blog post layout. And then let's make this whole thing optional, because it may be that I don't have a related post, so I don't want to show all this if it is. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little template string in here, copy this down, and just render this if related posts.length is greater than 0. If it is, then I will go ahead and return all of this. Now in this case, I don't want it to be blog categories. I want this to be related posts. Just like that. This would then say the same thing, related posts. Finally, I'm going to pass in a related post right here and tab to automatically include that. And then inside here, I'll have related posts. Let's just make sure that this is where I want it. Nope, let's put it up top with the rest of the component imports. And there we go. So now I've got related posts right over here. So I do have more than one. However, in this case, you can see I haven't done anything with it over here. So now that we've got this coming in, let's actually do something with it. So I want to take my related posts and I want to map over them. And for each post I want to go ahead and return some HTML. And here we'll have a div with a class of post. Because this section area has an H2, these all need to be H3s. So we'll do H3 with a class of H4 because I want it to be a little bit smaller. These will then be a link. And I'll point to the post.url and then post.frontmatter.title. And I could destructure all these up here, but I don't think it's that big of a deal because I'm only typing it once or twice, so I can just copy that down. I think that might be just as easy. And I'll take a small tag inside here. We're going to have two things here, both the author and then the formatted date. Now we've done this before in the card, so let's not repeat ourselves, and let's just copy it over here. So I'm going to grab, let's see, author, date, something like that. We'll grab that and drop it in here. And I need to grab this and change this to post.frontmatter.author. And again, if you want to destructure that, go for it. And then this will be post.frontmatter.date. Now if I save all that, moment of truth, there we go. It pulls up right over here, and you can see I've got a title that I can click on. I've also got a link to the author if I want, and that's pulling it in right here. And then I've got the date it was written. And this should not be the same post as what I'm currently on, and it's not. All right, but if I come over here like CSS and I read this one, I don't have that because I don't have any other CSS posts. If I come over here to my post 1 and I change this to CSS like that, and I refresh this page, I should have this showing up. Now, I think the problem might be actually a problem with what we talked about earlier, which is I need to make sure that these are lowercased. So let's come back over here where we looked at related posts. And here I just need to check that both of these have been too lowercased. And now I think if I come over here and click on CSS, I should have 2. When I scroll to the bottom, yeah, there they show. All right, so lowercase both of those. There may be another place where I forgot that, but it's not uncommon to run into these little edge cases. So if you find any more, let me know. All right, let me change this back to our, let's see, reference docs. Now we're getting near the end of this project. Next, we're going to work on a sitemap to make sure that your sitemap reflects your actual pages. That should be a short little video. Then we'll turn our attention to RSS feeds and on from there. All right, I'll catch you in the next video. Now, I hope you're feeling great about the blog so far, but there's one thing that you might want to know, and that would be how you can actually generate a sitemap. Now, sitemaps are helpful not just for people, but they also really help Google crawl your site and know exactly what pages should be indexed, and we can do all of that with an integration in Astro called sitemap. So I'm going to come over here, and let's just go ahead and install it. As another one of these nifty CLI tools that makes it really easy, I'm going to close down the sidebar, I'm going to kill the server, and then just type npx astro add sitemap. It's going to ask if it can install that, and I'll say yes. And then finally, it's going to update my Astro config for me. If I come over here to my Astro config, you can see that what it's done is it's added a sitemap at the end of all of this. Now, the nice thing about this is that's pretty much all you got to do. All right, so now I can just build the site itself. So if I say npm run build, which is not something I've shown you yet how to do, it's going to go through and build everything on the entire site. And then it's going to remind me of the only thing I had to tell you, which is that it's required that you have a site attribute. All right, so the one thing I forgot, if you come down here, let's see, right here. So you got to have something like a site. So this is inside the defined config, which is right here, but outside the integrations. Now in this case, when we get around to actually putting this up on the internet, which we are going to do in this series, I'm going to call it Astro Blog cip.netlify.app. Now I actually also have an instance of this available on my own website, Coding in Public, but we're going to do it here just so it lives separately and I can show you how to get it up on Netlify. Now that you got that, it can generate a sitemap. And like I said, it's just about as easy as this. So it builds everything and you can see it's created a sitemap for me. Now if I come over here, I can look inside the dist folder, which is where the final build will be. And I've got a sitemap 0 and I've also got a sitemap index. Now both of these will basically, one of them will point to the other one and then one of them will list off everything. So the sitemap index here just points over to this one. This one lists every page available. Now these are all the pages currently built on my site. Let's say I don't want this about page to be built in the sitemap for whatever reason. If I come down here, you can actually, let's see, there are a bunch of different configurations you can play around with. I just want to show you this filter one because I think that's really what most people would use. You can add multiple things you want to filter out. So let me show it to you. So it'll be just like this. So we're going to pass in, let's see, an object right here. This will have filter and automatically you get each page that has been built. And you can just say if page does not equal, and then as a string, you can just paste in whatever thing you don't want built. Now, if I save this here, I can go ahead and run it again. And when it's done, if I come over this way, let's see, and open up this, if I search for about, it shouldn't be there, and it's not. So if you want to exclude something, for instance, if you have something with like robots.txt as a meta tag and you don't want it indexed, you don't want it visible in your sitemap, you might want to exclude it like that. You can see over here, if you want to add multiple things, just throw a double ampersand there and you should be set to go. Now, I'm not going to filter anything out because in this case, it's not going to build your 404 anyhow, which is the only thing I wouldn't want included in here. So if I come over here and I search for 404, that's the wrong one. If I come over here and search for 404, it's not going to be visible. So that's the only thing I wouldn't want as part of my sitemap. And Astro is smart enough to know that anyhow. All right, so that's how you deal with sitemaps. If you want to play around with some other things like custom pages that aren't included in your Astro site, but you do want included in your sitemap or things like that, or limiting if you have more than 10,000 posts or something like that, I'll let you play around with these customizations. That's the basics and I think what most people will use. In the next video, we'll talk about RSS. Now, my friends, RSS can die when they pry it out of my dead cold hands. So let's go ahead and add RSS to this blog. There's another integration called RSS that you can add. So I'm going to go ahead and add this. Let's see, it also requires that site attribute that we added last time. So that shouldn't be a problem. Let's go ahead and install it like this. So I'm going to open up the terminal, close down the running dev server and install this. Let's spin back up npm run dev and get that up and running. I'll close that down then and then come over here. Just to mention briefly, you can actually have multiple different types of endpoints here. So if I were to come in here, you can see that you can have static like JS files or TS files in the pages directory that then build things like JSON files for you. So for instance, if you wanted to have some kind of client-side search, like a real basic search of content on your site, you could do that. There's libraries out there that you can play around with there. You can also build out like here's a JSON file, here's a PNG file. Let's see, there's other ones. Anyhow, what we're going to do is do the same kind of thing, except we're going to build an XML file. Now it's going to actually walk you through it right here, and I'm just going to copy all of this, and you'll notice that it has to be in your pages directory, and it needs to be at the top level. So let's call this rss.xml.js. So the .js is basically going to be removed, and in the end, it'll just be rss.xml. This is how these endpoints are created. So I'm going to go ahead and close this down. Let's get ourselves a little bit more room. Then I'm going to paste this in here. Now you'll notice what it's doing is importing our site variable from our Astro config, which is one of the ways you can do that. You can see it's actually telling you what it's doing there. And then it's creating items for the RSS feed from that automatically. And then you can add custom data if you want to down here. Now this isn't actually the most customizable way to do it. So I'm going to come down here and show you another way. So this is the same thing they just showed you. If you want to have more control over what these items look like, you can do that right here. So I'm going to actually copy this now and paste this in. You'll notice that it's doing some of the same stuff, like it's still grabbing that site variable from your Astro config, but it's actually using a post import result and doing the glob up here. Now in our case, what I actually want to do is come into my blog right here. And then this is the current working directory right here. So I'll just start here rather than going up and coming back down. And then here it's grabbing all my posts and it's actually just grabbing the values from that. Now, one thing I meant to mention the last time, draft posts are not added to your sitemap by default. They are, however, added to your RSS feed by default. Now, I think eventually they're going to get around to adding something in here, but we've already written a handy little function that we've gotten way too much use out of. So let's use that again right here. From, we'll go up a level to JS, and then we'll go into our utils. And now that I've got this format blog post, I can just wrap all of this right here. That means the only thing that should be my RSS feed are now posts that are not future and posts that are not drafts. Then all of this works just fine. Maybe we change this to like my Astro Blog or something, Astro Blog, and I don't remember what we had here, but that's fine. Now there are a couple things we need to change about the way they did this. For instance, we don't have a pub date, we just have a date as part of that front matter. So I'm going to change this to date. And then I actually want to add a couple of other things. So I want to add a description here. We'll call this post.frontmatter.description because that's what it's called in our Markdown files. And then you may have noticed in the earlier example that you can pass in custom data, and you can do that this method as well. So I'll say custom data, and here in backticks, I'm going to add author like this. This will just be post.frontmatter.author. Now, if I save this, and if I've done this correctly, I can come over this way, and I can simply go to the route that is rss.xml. If I do that, I get this nasty looking RSS feed, but most of the time that's totally fine. If you want people to actually be able to go to this and read it in like a more of a readable way, you can add custom styling. They actually tell you how you can add a style sheet. So to start with, we'll just add it just like this, and let's just add it up top here. That's fine. You may notice that this points to RSS. This is at the root of the directory. So where would we put that? Well, we'd put it in the public folder right here. So I need a folder that says RSS inside of there, and then inside of here, I need this to say styles.xsl. Now, I don't write XSL, so I'm going to go ahead and just grab this pretty feed from here. And let's see, I'm going to copy it, and then I'm going to paste it over here. If I come back here and I refresh, it doesn't do anything because I haven't saved this. All right, there we go. Now I get this prettified looking thing. You may notice that the custom things I passed in, though, are not being added here. So what I need to do is to come back to my styles and actually add them here. Now, this is a little kind of gobbledygook to me, but I can see enough what's going on here that we can add stuff pretty quickly. So I'm just going to add 2 paragraph tags, and this first one will say by. Then I'm just going to copy all this. And you'll notice that this pub date that I was using down here comes from this right here. So I think I can just add custom data right here and description right here. So since we're doing by first, let's go ahead and grab the author, and we'll say author. And I did that in the wrong place, so this should be author right here. And then let's copy this down. And I don't need a by here, but I can go ahead and add the description here. So now if I save this and come over here, you'll see I have by the author's name and then a quick description. So there you go, and then I've got links to all the posts as well at the final state, which is that Astro Blog CIP. Let's hope nobody has used that. Otherwise, well, I don't know where this will take you. All right, so there we go. The style sheet should be set and ready to go. RSS feed as well. Now, when I come back over here, I don't yet have a way to really access that. Of course, somebody could just crawl the site and figure out where it's at, but why not add a little link so people can access it? And let's do it down here in the footer. So let me open up the footer, and I'm going to do a couple things just for styling purposes. Number one, I'm going to grab all of this and hit Command Shift and P, wrap it with an abbreviation, and add a div, so that will be inside the footer itself. Then below this small tag, I'm going to add one more. This is going to have a link inside of it. It's going to point to my public directory, essentially, .xml, so the root of my site, and it will just say subscribe to RSS. Now next to this, I'm going to actually have an icon. Now, it's been a little while since we've used the icon that we pulled in, that icon library, so it just goes like this. We're going to import the icon from Astro Icon. Down here then, I just want to access the icon itself, so icon will use this component. I'll pass it a name. In this case, I'm going to stick with my tabular that we've been using so far on the site. We'll use their RSS version. We'll set the width here to 20 and the height to 20, and then I'll close out this tag. Now, if I save this, you see that I've got this nice subscribe RSS feed. If I click it, it takes me right to that RSS feed. So now we're set and ready to go with that. So we've got the copyright, we've got the RSS feed, it's styled as we want. It's pulling in some custom data, and it's pulling in our description as well. I should note this RSS is fairly limited right now. At least the last I checked, you couldn't include the entire post content in here yet. I don't know if they've been working on that. I didn't see anything yet about it, but keep your eyes open. I think this is ripe for them refactoring when they have some time. So I'd pay attention to this, and if you know of an update, please let me know in the description. All right, I will catch you in the next one where we're going to look at some SEO basics for your blog. In lesson 16 here, we're going to focus on SEO, but I don't want to actually spend a lot of time writing SEO stuff because number one, it's kind of boring, and number two, really that's kind of beyond the scope of this course. I just want to show you how you could incorporate SEO into these blog post heads. Now, we will take some time to actually write a couple things in Astro to actually tie all this together, but I don't want you to have to type out manual like meta tags. So what I'm going to have you do is actually copy some code from the description. You're going to copy 3 files. So in the description, you'll find a link to lesson 16 down below. And then what I want you to do is copy a file in here called SEO. You're going to copy a data file in here called sitedata.json. And then down here in the JS folder, you're going to copy one called jsonld.js. So do that and come right back with me. Okay, I hope you were able to get all 3 of those copied in here. You can see I've got SEO, I've got sitedata.json, and JSON-LD. Now what we're going to do is just quickly talk through kind of what you might use and then how I set this up. And then we're going to tie it all together, and that will really be where we spend our time. So over here, you're going to see we've got a sitedata.json. This includes kind of like base stuff for my site. So like a basic title, a basic description, an image tag that's a default. If I don't have one, this would be for SEO purposes. And just so that when I share the link, I have an open graph meta tag image so that it looks like an actual site rather than just a URL that I send somebody. Now I wanted to make this a JSON file because we haven't really worked with JSON, but just to show you that you can import JSON just like you would in any other application that uses JavaScript. You're doing the same thing right here. You're going to import JSON actually in a couple places, right here in the Astro file and then also in the JSON-LD file. Let's go over to the SEO next. And over here, you're going to see I'm importing the site data here. I'm also importing this file, which we'll talk about in a second. And then I'm pulling in a bunch of things: titles, descriptions, URLs, images, front matter, and robots. Now, some of these we still need to pass in. But as I come down this way, you're going to see that what I'm going to do is generate some JSON-LD, which we'll talk about later. So let's skip this for now. And just to show you that what we're doing is taking all the stuff we pass in and basically building out some important stuff for SEO. So for instance, I want the canonical link to point to whatever the current page is. Then I'm going to add a bunch of open graph meta tags. You can see I'm just taking the title, the description. I'm basically saying, hey, if there's an image, show me that image. Otherwise, grab the image from the site data. Same thing here with these other image options for URL and secure URL. Then I'm coming down here and just defining the same height and width for all these. This happens to be what these images are. And same thing here for the alt. So I'll either use the alt that's been passed in or I'll use the site default. Now I've done the same thing for Twitter. We've added the title, the description, I've added the image, I've added the image alt, and then the domain itself I'm actually pulling from my Astro config. And this is how you can pull that site variable that we added in there, that property. There's just 2 other things in here. One would be this robots. So sometimes you might want to actually hide a site from like crawlers and stuff, and you can do that by simply passing in this meta tag. So if that's ever the case, if this ever exists on any page, if I pass in robots equals true, then I want to make sure that I show this so that it's not crawled by web crawlers and stuff. Okay, finally, we've got this JSON-LD, and I've got this fragment, which might seem a little bit weird to you because we haven't been working really with fragments. When you typically work with fragments, it's when you're like looping over stuff in React, and you have to output some JSX, but you don't have just one element. So you can use a fragment, and then you can basically wrap your stuff, and it will disappear when it's rendered. Now in this case, you can use fragments. What I'm doing is using a special property here called set::HTML. And this is why I wanted to do JSON-LD, just to show you one use case for this directive, which we have not yet talked about. And that is sometimes you have HTML you need to insert directly into your page. Now for safety reasons, Astro doesn't let you just do that. You can, however, use this set::HTML inside the front tag, or if it's a self-closing tag, inside its tag, and then point it to whatever HTML that you're passing in. So we'll talk about this, and maybe I'll show you a real life example here in a second. This right here, this JSON-LD is what's coming in from over here. Now over this way, what I've done is I'm just using my slugify function we have already created and the site data. And then I'm basically going to ask, hey, is this the type of post? If it is, I want you to return JSON-LD that would correspond to a type of post. And it's the same kind of stuff, the post date, the author, an image for the post, title, and description. Otherwise, just return like a generic one for the website itself. The website itself should pull in the title from my site data, and it should pull in kind of the base URL from the Astro config. Now, again, I'm not really trying to go over this in grave detail. If you don't know about the Open Graph tags or those Twitter tags, if you don't know about JSON-LD, JSON-LD is usually the thing people don't know about as much. And here's a helpful site that'll help you actually generate what you need. So you can look at like local SEO and all this kind of stuff, and it will generate it for you. So in this case, I've looked at an article, and it just tells you, hey, here's how this should look. Now, once you've got this up and running, you can actually run a test either on your page itself or on the resulting code. And if I remember, I'll show you that here in a second. Okay, so let's get all this up and running. And I realize that perhaps that telling you what I did is a little difficult to follow, but the only other way would be to type all this out manually, and then this would be kind of an SEO course, and that's not really my point. And there may be some ways to improve this as well. If you have suggestions, I'd be happy to hear. Okay, let me close this down, and let me close this down. And what we need to do is pull in that SEO into our head itself. So if I come down to my layouts, I've got this main head right here. This is where I want to add this SEO. Now, I've already got a couple things like the title and the description. Technically, those would be for like SEO, so that's all right. We'll be fine. All right, now what I'm going to do is just go ahead and pull in the SEO like this. If I start to type, the Astro extension should pull that directly in. And if I come up top here, so yeah, there it is. So let's go ahead and call this like component imports. Now, I need to pass all the stuff down to the SEO. It's actually all the same stuff I get up here. In addition to that, I need a couple of other things as well. So let's open back up the SEO and just remember what I need. So I need all of this. So let me come over here, and I'm going to add all of this in here. Now, we need to change this around a little bit. First of all, we're passing in essentially like title equals title here, but in Astro, you can just do it like this. Same thing with description. Now, Astro itself has a way to get the canonical URL with astro.url. So I'm just going to type it like that, astro.url, and I think that should work. Now, the image is something I'm only going to get if I've passed in a blog. So for now, I'm just going to surround it like this, and I'll explain why in a second. Same thing for the front matter. And then robots can be from anywhere, but we'll do the same thing. It'll just be robots equals robots. Now, these I've not pulled into my Astro props up top. So let me come up top here, and I'll add image, front matter, robots. I think that's everything I need. Let me come back down here. Yeah, so that should work. The URL we're going to just pull directly from here. And this should be in brackets, and the URL should not be capitalized. All right, because this is something that Astro gives us. All right, so let me talk you through what we're going to do. So this head itself should receive a title and description every time, and it'll get a URL when Astro generates that for each page. Now, if it's a post, it could have an image and a front matter that gets passed down. Otherwise, these will just be empty. There'll be nothing there. Finally, if I want to, I can attach a robots, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. Now, all this is coming down to the main head, which you know what that means. I need to get it down to this component. If you remember how we set all this up, let me open up the sidebar again. This main layout passed it down here to the main head. So let's do a little bit more prop drilling. I'll pass in here an image, front matter, and then finally robots. We need to add the same things inside here to give it down to the head. So we'll say image equals image, or you can just do it like this in bracketed syntax. We'll say front matter. Finally, it will say robots. Now, my main layout is used by all my pages, but it's also used by my blog post layout. You might remember we wrapped this main layout in the blog post layout, or rather the other way around. So I'm actually going to grab the same stuff here. So just like this, we'll come over to the blog post layout. I come up here. Actually, now I've already got the front matter, and in that I'll have the image, and I would have a robots.txt if I want to for some reason on a post. So actually, I don't need these right here from the props. I just need to pass in these. So I'll come back over this way, come down here, and I need to pass this into the main layout. Now in this case, I've got front matter. I can pass it in just like this. I'm going to actually separate out the image, just pull it out of the front matter. That way it's a little easier to work with. On the other side, I won't have to keep typing front matter. So here I'm going to say front matter.image. And we'll do the same thing over here. So I'll set my robots to be equal to front matter.robots. Now I know I'm kind of passing some of these things down twice because front matter contains both of these, but it's okay. It's just the way I set this up to make it a little easier to work with on the other side, and hopefully a little easier to understand. Now, if you're not writing it yourself, I know this can be a little confusing, so let me talk through this one more time and then I'll show you how it works. So let me go ahead and save this. So on any normal page of my site, all the content will go inside this slot. The page itself will pass along all this stuff, the image, the front matter, and the robots if it happens to be that. And most of them just have a title and description, so that's mostly all I'll get. For instance, if I were to come over to my About page, you can see that's what's happened over here. I've just passed in a title and description. So this will go down to the main layout right here. These two, they'll then be passed on to the main head. Now, when I come to the main head itself, it will grab all those and it will pass it down here to the SEO. Now, this will be the only thing it passes on along with the URL because I haven't passed any of these on from the About page. Then finally, when I get into the SEO, at this point, I'm going to grab all these things again I'm going to go ahead and just populate all the Open Graph and the Twitter stuff with the content that's been passed in. If I passed in robots, which we'll do in a second, you'll see that it'll add this tag. And then finally, it generates this based on a JavaScript file that returns plain old HTML. That plain old HTML is based on whether it's a post or it's a website. Now, the way to decide that is if it has front matter. So if it has front matter that's been passed in as a prop called front matter, the only way that happens is if it's already a post. In that case, I will say, hey, go ahead and call this type of post. Otherwise, it'll be type of website. Now, in that JSON LD, the first thing I'm checking is if it's a type of post, which I'm getting down from that. Then I'll also get the post itself and the URL. These will only be useful, obviously, in here because everything else will just be generic right here. So if you tracked all that, let me close a lot of these things down, and I'll stick with just the About page for now. I'll save this. Let's open this up. And inside the head, we should have a bunch of SEO stuff. All right, so here it is. We've got our SEO, our canonical link. I've now got all my Open Graph stuff, and notice that this is connected to the actual page I'm on. Now I'm looking at the home page right now, so it's giving me all this default stuff. So let's go to the About page since that's what I've got open over here. So I'll open this up here, and now you see this is content about. That's the title, a bad title for the page, but it is. The description is just my About page. Because no image was passed in with this page, it just uses the default one. As I scroll back down, you got the same thing with Twitter. It uses the default one. It's going to use my base site from my Astro config. And then this JSON LD is inside the script tag. You'll notice because it's not a post, it's just using the website version, which is the super generic one that just says it's a website. Now, what if I wanted to pass in a robots.txt? Well, all I'd have to do is say that I want to make sure that this About page passes down to the main layout, robots equals true. Now, if I do that, I come back over here to the head, I scroll back down, you're going to see I've got robots right here, so it should not be crawled by search engines. Now, you can do more with these robots, but I'll leave that to you. Let me go ahead and kill this here, and then let's look at a blog post itself. So if I come over here to a blog post, and that's just the blog, so let me open this post right here. I come inside here, you're going to see that it gives me a bunch of other stuff here. I've got the title and the description that already is coming in like we set it up to start with. Then I actually get the canonical URL, which is the URL I'm currently at. Eventually, this will be my end point when I get around to actually posting it live. Now down here, I've got the site name, I've got the title of the post, I've got the description of the post, I've got the custom URL, the actual image from the post itself, and then I've got its alt, all this kind of stuff. In the JSON LD, I've actually scoped this out as a blog post, and it will tell the type of page it is, it'll get the description, all this kind of stuff, the author, the person who did it, the date it was published. All this is going to be done through what we set up today. Now, the nice thing about these Twitter cards and these Open Graph images is when I share this on like an iPhone or I share this on lots of different platforms, it will actually grab that data and generate kind of a nice rich link that will preview the image, give the title, all that kind of stuff, and that's done with these Open Graphs. Now, if you didn't come here for an SEO course and you're not familiar with this already, I realize that this might be a lot all at once, but I just wanted to show you, if you are familiar with it, how I might set it up in a normal site. And that way, at least these things will have Open Graph images and all that if you were to share it from the site we're going to eventually publish. And before we close this out, I want to talk one more time about that set:/HTML. So let me come back. Let's go to the About page since that's what we're at over here. And let's say I've got some HTML up here, const like paragraph or something like this. And maybe it's just a paragraph string that says hi, like this. All right, now if I were to try to insert this into anywhere in my page, let's say I did it above this section, I might think I can just say paragraph. If I do that though, it's just going to actually put the text itself. And what I want is this to be rendered as HTML. Well, how do we do that? Well, there are a couple different ways. Like I showed you a second ago, you can actually use a fragment and then just use the set:/HTML. In this case, I'm going to set this to my paragraph, and then it will actually render it as hi. And you see it puts it actually down here just because of the way I've got this styled. Now, sometimes you'll actually have like embedded content. Maybe it's a whole string of stuff here, and you want to embed it inside of it like a div or something like that. So in that case, what I might do is come here and have a div, and this would say set:/HTML, and it would point to my paragraph. And now if I were to inspect this, it's not just a paragraph, and because it's a div the way I have all the CSS set up, it's actually inside of a div, and I've set the paragraph to say that. Well, in the next video, we're going to look at several key integrations as kind of the final thing we do before we build. So we'll build a React component. I'll show you how to set up Tailwind. We'll talk a little bit about using like a CMS, and all of that will be in the next video. I'll catch you then. For all practical intents and purposes, we are done with this build. However, I want to show you a bunch of different integrations that you can do to kind of enhance your site itself. I've been promising since the beginning to show you something with React, so I'm going to do that. We'll also then look at Tailwind. I'll then show you a couple other things like Partytown, which is a really cool script that will actually offload your external scripts on like a separate thread using web workers. And it's super easy to get started with Astro. Then I'll show you how to get started with the CMS and just point you to a direction for something with Sanity. And then finally, I want to show you one thing about the CSS that you may want to customize if you're going to use the CSS and heavily customize it. All right, let's go ahead and jump in. We'll start with React. So I'm going to come up here to the Astro website. If I just come over to integrations, I'm going to get access to a bunch of different integrations. Now, as you can see here, I've got a bunch of featured ones. What I want to do is look at, let's see, frameworks. And in here, I've got this Astro React. So let's start with this. And it couldn't be easier to get started. You literally just use this right here, and it will do everything for you. So I'm going to close down the server, type that in, and then yes, I'm going to install all those things. And then it wants to update my Astro config. Go for it. And I'll hit yes one more time, and we're set. So just so you can see everything it did there, it updated my TS config and actually added the types for that. And then it also updated my Astro config right here, and it tells me exactly what it did. Okay, so with that out of the way, that's all we have to do. All right, so now I can just come in here and say npm run dev. Now it's back up and running, but let me come over here and at the blog itself, let's open up a sidebar, and I want to add another component, except in this case, it's going to be a JSX component. So how about we call this counter.jsx? We're going to keep this real simple because this isn't really a React tutorial. I've got a little snippet that will add in a React arrow functional component. And you can see here it just says counter, and it's exporting this counter. Now I'll keep this real simple. I am going to go ahead and have some state in here. So we'll say count and then set count. And I'll get this from use state. And as I start to type, you'll see I've got this snippet pulling in right here. If I click, it should import that, and it does up top. Now all I'm going to do is change this out to be a button. And then I'll say on click, and let's handle this click. So we'll just say each time it's clicked, I want to set the count to the prev plus 1. And then in the middle here, I just want this to be the count. So if you know React, this is about as simple as it gets. So I've got this counter up and running. Let's go ahead and put it in the footer, and that way I can show you a couple things as well. So I'll take the footer down here, and let's see, let me put it in between these two. So all I'm going to do is start typing counter, and I think that pulls it in up top with the extension I happen to have, or you can just reference it like I have up top here, counter like this. If I go ahead and save this, it looks like I had a problem. So let's come over here. Well, I have to initialize use state. So it's so simple that I forgot to initialize the state. Okay, there we go. Now, if I come down here to the footer, it should be down here in the base. Now, Astro ships no client-side JavaScript. So if I click this, nothing is going to happen. So it's actually rendered the UI, but it hasn't allowed me to actually hydrate it with any kind of JavaScript. So that means it's not interactive, but it is visible. Now, why would this be important? Well, if you just like writing in React or Vue or Svelte or whatever, and you want to use Astro, you can actually write all your components in something like Vue or React, and it will render them to the DOM as just plain old UI elements. And if you just prefer that for your UI, perfect, you're done, and you've got plain HTML at the end of the day using your favorite UI framework. Then for the little bits and pieces where you actually need interactivity, you can actually hydrate them individually. So let me come back up here. Let's see. Over here, I don't remember if it's right here. Yeah, right here. So let's look at the UI framework documentation. And here you're going to see that we can use a client directive to change how it is hydrated. Now there's a couple different options we have. Client load just means that component's JavaScript will begin importing as soon as the page loads. Client visible is even a little bit smarter. It will actually not load the JavaScript until it's on the page. Now there is also a client only directive. You can see it does not render on the server, but it will render on the client when the page loads. So that's a little bit different. These two will actually do what I just showed you, which is they'll actually render the UI immediately, even here in dev, which is they'll render the UI immediately. Now let me come back over here and let's change this. Let's see, I can close this down. Here's where I will add that directive. So we'll say client load, and that's it. So if I save that, let me come down here. I should be able to click on this and it should now update state, and it does, which is pretty cool. Now let's look at the network tab so we can see exactly what's happening here. So if I go ahead and reload this page and let's look at everything, you can see I get 29 requests. So I'm actually getting in here React, and you can see it right here. Let's go ahead and change this. Let me come all the way up top. And 29 requests, remember that. Let's change this to client visible. Now, I've only got 22 requests now at this point. As I start to scroll though, you'll notice that when I get to the very end of the page where that React component is, immediately it will fetch everything else I need, and now it's interactive. So if you've got something further down on your site that people may not interact with, there's no reason to make them load the JavaScript. So I love this client visible idea of hydration where you're only loading it if they absolutely need it. Now, one thing to think about here is there is not state that is stored like globally for the site. So if I come over here and scroll to the bottom, this is back down to 0. And Astro does talk about some state libraries you can use. I'll let you figure that out in their documentation here. I don't remember if it's on this page or not, but you can actually use different state libraries to actually maintain state across your components, but that's kind of beyond the scope of what I'm talking about in this tutorial. All right, so that's the first thing I wanted to show you, and that is how to get started with React. Now next, let's look at CSS. About the only framework that I would really use is Tailwind, so I want to show you how to get up and started with that. It's obviously very popular. It's pretty easy to get going. You just do the same thing. So I'm going to add Tailwind right like this. So I'll say yes and install all those dependencies, and then it will generate my Tailwind config file for me, and then it will update my Astro config for me. So I'll say npm run dev. I'll shut that down and let's look over here at what it created. So if I shut this down here, you're going to see it created this Tailwind config file for me automatically, including adding Astro files directly in here. And then it also updated my Astro config, and you can see it added Tailwind down here as well. So I love these CLI commands because it means I don't have to type out a bunch of random stuff. It just takes care of it for me. Now that really is all there is to using Tailwind in Astro. So let me go ahead and close this down right here. And we're going to go back to the home page. And why don't I just come into this home page and let's destroy everything that we worked so hard on inside these pages. Let's come right inside here. I'm just going to get rid of all of this. And we'll have some front matter. I don't know that we'll really use that. But let's say I have a paragraph here that says like, "Hi Bob," or something like that. So if I save it, there we go. Somehow this thinks it's Arabic. All right, so I can close this down, but you can see it's actually using Tailwind because I'm not using that layout that imports my global style sheet. Now that means I can come in here and say something like text 3XL, and suddenly it's huge. I can say font bold, so that's all I have to do. As soon as I install that with npx, Tailwind is just everywhere on my site. Now I had to remove everything we did because otherwise the global style sheet might conflict with some of the classes in Tailwind. So let me go ahead and get rid of this so that we've got the finished product that we worked so hard on. And that's how to get started with Tailwind. Let's come back to the integrations. I want to show you a couple of other things. I mentioned earlier that you can use MDX if you'd like to, and to do that you just have to install it the same way we've been doing, and then you get access to all the power of MDX, which allows you to use JavaScript in your Markdown files essentially. But just a quick note that that's where you'd find that. And one of the things that can frustrate me the most about building static sites that are super fast is sometimes you have to include third-party scripts that then just slow down everything and they take away all your hard work. So you have to add like a Google Analytics script and suddenly your site's slow because it's blocking the main thread. Well, there's actually an open source project called Partytown. Let's see, where is this thing? Yeah, right here. That will take all of those things off the main thread using a web worker. Now, I don't totally understand how it works, but I don't really have to because it really honestly is super easy. I'm going to install this, and that's all I'm going to do. So I'll say, yes, install that. And then I really should be letting you see what it's going to do. It's just adding this into the config. I say yes, and that's it. So now if I have any third-party scripts, it will take those off of the main thread, and it means that my site can be just as fast as I want, and then it will load those things on the side. The Astro docs are full of these integrations, and it seems more are added every day. I promised you two other things. One is how to get started with a CMS, and two, just one thing to think about customizing when it comes to the CSS on the site that we're building here. So if I come over here, let's just think through what we've done so far. Let me open up the sidebar over here. Inside of this blog, you might remember that we refactored this page itself so that it was more dynamic. That allowed us to have our pagination, and it basically will create these auto subroutes for us. Now, if you think about it, that's exactly what we would want to do if we were pulling in all the content from a CMS. We'd want to have some kind of dynamic routing that will then generate the pages we need and basically create them on the fly. So you can use this same kind of syntax to do that. Now there are a bunch of different CMSs that they've actually created integrations for. There's Storyblock, there are a couple others in here as well. What I want to do is just point out one by a guy named Jaden Irwin. Now he also has a YouTube channel and he's done a decent amount on Astro as well. You should go check him out. He's super helpful and clearly a very talented developer. But if you wanted to use something like Sanity, let me just show you how he does it in a real life project. So as you might expect, if you come in here to Pages, under Blog, you're going to have the same kind of thing where you've got an actual dynamic page. Now what he's doing is he's getting all of his posts here from an API, and I'll show you that in a second. And then he's returning them all in a map with the params and with props. And then he's using the props down here, and the params would obviously be the URLs. All of this is coming from Sanity, and he's created a little helper library to do that for him. So let me come back out this way into the API. And you'll see he's got this grok query, which is how Sanity works, or you can use grok with Sanity. And it returns this data here so that when he uses this function, get all posts, it's returning essentially an array of all of those posts. So it's very similar to what we did here, where we're getting a list of all of our posts, except in this case, it's not a local thing inside of a Markdown file. It's actually from Sanity. And then I'm just looping through them and creating pages for each of those individual posts. Now, in some ways, it's more like the category page we have without these three dots because it's not creating these paginated pages. It's creating individual pages for each thing that's been passed in. So if you can fetch from any source, you have all the knowledge you need to dynamically generate pages based on what we did in this series. Now, one final thing, let me close all these things down, and I'm going to open up my global CSS file. Now, this has been untouched because I've told you not to touch it, and it's been, kind of fragile as we've been moving, and I've explained that to you just to kind of be able to focus on Astro. However, I do want to show you one thing, just the way I've set this up. If I scroll down here, you'll see that in a root declaration, I have a hue color. This hue color is what colors all the stuff on the site. If you wanted to use this, you might want to change this hue color to something else. And you can see how everything updates automatically. So maybe you like a slightly redder color, or maybe you like a really nasty green. Well, go for it. Maybe you want it to be pink or something more bluish. I'm going to change mine back to that purple color at 235, but this hue is being used as an HSL value here. And the same thing applies when you move over to dark mode. So all these colors just adapt for you. So let's change this back to something like 20. And you can see how everything adapts for you based on whatever hue you've chosen. Now, I kind of like that color, so maybe I'll just leave it there for the end of this video. Now, in the final video in the series, we're going to actually publish this to Netlify. I'm going to go ahead and remove all the things we did in this video so that it will be kind of what we built together before now. All right, I'll catch you there for the final build. We are ready for the final step, and that is getting this thing public somewhere on the web. Now, Astro has some great documentation on exactly how to deploy your site, and there's a bunch of individual guides. So if you're using one of these services, take advantage of that. I'm going to scroll down here and just mention quickly that what we're going to do is use a continuous deployment using Git. In other words, every time we push to the Git repository, that will then automatically generate a build. And in our case, we're going to choose Netlify. This is one of the hosts they mentioned that uses continuous deployment so that every time you add a new post and you push that post to your GitHub, it will automatically trigger a rebuild and then your site will be updated. So pretty cool, right? All right, so let's go ahead and I'm just going to do a couple things here first. Number one, remember you do need a Git repository, and I'm assuming that you've committed everything. That's what I've done here locally. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and stop this server. And I'm going to come over to GitHub, and you can do this a bunch of different ways, but let's go ahead and just create a new repository. I'm going to call this Astro Blog Netlify. I'm going to create this as a new repository. And then because I've already have a repository and I've already committed everything to it, I'm just going to copy this and paste it in my local terminal here. So I'll paste this and hit enter. And when it's done, if I come over here and refresh, everything should be there. There it is, all the stuff that we just committed. Now, just a quick note, this is not the repo in the description because I wanted to just do it off one branch like you might do. So that's why I'm going to leave this thing private. So don't try to go here. Instead, go to the Astro blog. I think it's tutorial, but there'll be a link in the description. Now that it's up here, all I need to do is to go to app.netlify.com, and I'm going to sign in with GitHub. Now, it authorizes it here, and it has a few sites that I've already done. I'm just going to click Add a New Site, and I'll import an existing project. The provider I'm using is GitHub. It just double checks, and I'm going to come over here and choose the Netlify option. This is the one that you'll actually want to reference if you want to see the finished code and each stage along the way. Now, it's smart enough to actually look at my NPM package and figure out exactly what the build directory will be, what framework I'm using. In this case, I'm using Astro, and it's ready to go. So I'm just going to click Deploy Site, and then it's going to start deploying the site. So let's give this just a couple seconds, and then I'll be right back with you. All right, it's done. In fact, if I go right here and I click on this, it shows it live on the web right here, and everything should work just like it did in production. Obviously, I want it to have my own custom URL, not whatever this thing is. So we can set up a custom domain here, or let me just go here. And under options, I'll edit the site name. And then just to make sure I get this exactly correctly to what I put, I'm going to come grab all of this and assume that nobody else has titled something exactly like that. Now, I do want this to be the exact same wherever I publish it, because remember, my sitemap, my RSS feed, all that stuff is based on this site variable. So I'll click Save. And just like that, I now have access to that domain, and all my sitemap and all that kind of stuff should work perfectly. Now, you might remember that we added a bunch of Open Graph tags. Let's go ahead and look at those. See, there's a bunch of places you can go to, but a lot of times I'll go to opengraph.xyz, and I'll just paste in that URL. Now it's going to scan that and look and see what it has. And this is how this Open Graph image will look. This is the default image that I shared. Obviously, it's just a screenshot of the actual app of the website, but you can see how that Open Graph is coming through on Twitter, on Discord, anywhere that you would share it. So that's the advantage of all that SEO stuff we did a couple of videos ago. Now, if I come over to the blog here, we've got the ones that we already created. Let's go ahead and create another one though, and we'll do it for like 12.6. And I'm going to show you how that continuous deployment works. So if I come under my pages and I go into my blog, maybe let's just duplicate this right here, and I'll change this to say 7. In this case, I'm going to change this to 12.6, and then we'll just say new blog post. Now I need to commit these changes, and I can do that in whatever way you would typically do it. Let's just come over here and say like added new post. And then I need to make sure to add this so it's staged, and I'll come up here and commit and push. Now the cool thing is if I come back over this way and I come up top here, you'll notice that it's already building based off of that new thing. And here's my get message, added new post. I can come in here and watch the log, and by the time I got in here, it was already done. So let me come back over here to my blog, and that new post should be right here. There it is. So as soon as I push, it's already up to date, and here it is with everything else that's connected to it. Looks like this one is pretty much the exact same thing. Yep, just the different title. So pretty cool how you got that continuous deployment as you add new Markdown files. All your auto routes just work for you. You can see how I can go to next, and now I have 3 over here instead of just the 2 I think I had before. I hope you really enjoyed this series. I had so much fun putting it together. If you did enjoy it, go ahead and leave me a comment in the description. That's always a big encouragement. Like the video, of course, you can share it with others. That would be the biggest help. And then I want to say, again, a special thanks to my Patreon supporters. Right now, it's just a thank you, essentially. I don't have time to do extra stuff for Patreons, unfortunately. I would love to, but I just don't quite have the time right now on my schedule. So if you'd like to express gratitude and you want to do it that way, that would be great. No pressure either way. I hope you learned a lot about Astro, and I will catch you in the next video. Happy coding.